Go take a swan dive off the roof if you really want a quirk so badly. Something sparked within Izuku as Bakugo said those words. He'd withstood years of torment by the blonde, but telling him to kill himself was a crossing line too far for Izuku to handle. Izuku near immediately turned around, filled with a mix of rage and bitterness, suddenly finding the courage to give a response to his tormentors. Amused by Izuku's sudden bravery, Bakugo raised his hand and created a few small explosions in his hand as a reminder. Yeah? What? Any bravado Izuku felt in the moment instantly vanished like the wind. After all, what could he do to someone like Kakin who had a quirk, and a very powerful one at that? Any attempt at retaliation would simply make things worse. Seeing his sudden shift back to submission, Bakugo and his lackeys simply laughed at how pathetic the whole situation was and left the classroom, leaving Izuku alone to wallow in misery. After their interaction, Izuku somehow found his way outside of the school, trying to salvage what remained of his notebook from the koi tank that it landed in. As he tried to stop the koi fish from consuming what remained of his notebook, his hopelessness began to truly fester. I really am a useless Deka, huh? What do I even have in this life? He would never amount to anything. He was a disappointment to those around him. Why did he even bother? Maybe Kakin's right. Sometimes, a single sentence can plant seeds of thought that grow to bear disastrous fruits. At the moment, Izuku was on the rooftop of Aldera Junior High, preparing for his swan dive. He was too scared to choose any other ways out, like hanging or slitting his wrists out of fear of the pain. Instead, he'd chosen a way that was the quickest to guarantee his end. It was surprisingly easy to get onto the rooftop of the school, given that the school was near empty during after-school hours. More surprising, however, was the fact that the door to the rooftop wasn't locked, easily giving any student direct access to the rooftop. Nonetheless, even if the door to the rooftop was locked, he wouldn't have been deterred. A random classroom on the third floor with a window view was also a possible place to carry out the deed. Izuku removed his shoes, placing them near the railing beside his backpack. He didn't want anyone to think that there was foul play involved. After all, he chose this. Inside his backpack was a note explaining his decision. In the note, he'd asked his mom not to blame herself since it wasn't her fault, that she was the best mom he could ever wish for. He expressed his self-loathing as a quirkless person, of how he was done, and of how he decided it would be better to move on to another life, where maybe he wouldn't be so different, and where he wouldn't be useless to everyone around him. Despite Kakin's involvement leading up to his choice, Izuku chose not to mention him in his note, as he didn't want to implicate Kakin as a factor in his seemingly negative choice and ruin Kakin's future prospects and dream of being the best hero in the world. A Deku like him didn't deserve to stain someone else's future. He stared forward into the view of the city, trying to enjoy the view and to prevent himself from looking down and feeling afraid for what he was about to do. It felt calming at the very least. Izuku took a deep breath, readying himself for his final deed in life. Mustering the will to move his useless body, he shut his eyes as tightly as he could and leaned forward over the railing, letting gravity finish the job. As he fell feeling the wind, he only had one thought. I'm sorry, everyone. In less than a second, Izuku's body impacted into the ground, creating a loud, smacking thud. The force of the fall had fractured multiple parts of his body, including his skull, spine, and limbs, all shattering into several pieces. Blood began to rapidly flow out the wounds he received, staining his green hair along with parts of his uniform red. The ground around his dying and mangled body was stained a deep red. The damage he suffered quickly sent his body into shock, rapidly rendering him unconscious. Any passerby who stumbled upon the sight wouldn't be wrong to assume that he was dead. On that day, Izuku Midoriya should have died a gruesome death. Instead, he was blessed by the heavens and survived. But he would not survive unchanged, for his soul had been transformed, having warped into something that was not of his world. In the another world. What's your name? Megumi's eyes widened in bewilderment. What the hell? Why would he ask a question now? And why ask my name of all questions? The man standing before Megumi, who wielded a sharpened edge of playful cloud, stared intently, halting his attempts of ending Megumi's life to await a response. Megumi, at this point, had virtually run out of options. Physically, he was at his limit, nearing collapse, and only kept standing by the adrenaline flowing throughout his body and an intense desire to not die. That wasn't his only issue, though. His cursed energy reserves were nearing zero, having been mostly exhausted during his domain clash with the octopus-headed special grade curse spirit, and even more exhausted from a showdown with a monstrous man in front of him who didn't emit even a drop of cursed energy. His all, or a nothing gamble at a surprise attack on said man also failed pathetically, as said man simply backstepped to dodge said stab from Megumi. The man wasn't something he could defeat or outrun even under normal circumstances. It was foolish of him to envision a future of him doing so. He was facing a beast cloaked in the skin of a man. Only as something no lesser than a miracle could allow him to survive. Dropping his cursed tool, Megumi angled his fists, readying himself to summon his 10th and most dangerous Shikigami. Said Shikigami was never tamed throughout the history of its existence, and had the power to rival Satoru Gojo, currently the strongest sorcerer alive. Summoning it in his current state would most certainly guarantee his death. However, at the very least, the man hunting him like his rabbits would also be guaranteed to go down with him, leaving no victors. Upon hearing the strange man's question, however, Megumi was briefly stunned. Overcoming his initial surprise, he decided to tell the man his name, concluding that telling or not telling the man his name likely wouldn't make a difference in the fight's outcome. Fushiguro, he replied, slight confusion lacing his voice. Near instantly, the man's demeanor changed. The neutral and blank expression on his face changed, his mouth beginning to warp into a somber smile. The void-like darkness of his scarab began to fade, returning to the whites of normal eyes. A sense of clarity and awareness also appeared to wash over the man, as if waking up from a long dream. And that was exactly what Toji Fushiguro felt in the moment. Realizing that he was fighting his own son, Toji had very briefly regained his senses, breaking free of the spell he was under and returning to a normal state of mind, unclouded by an overwhelming lust to fight the strongest opponent in his vicinity. Not even experiencing an afterlife, he'd reawakened near instantaneously after his first death to find himself as a puppet of carnage, one that wouldn't stop until it broke. Somewhat aware of this fate, Toji firmly decided on his next action. He knew that there was only one thing he could do to ensure his son's safety, lest he lose himself to the effects of the seance technique again and actually succeed in ending his son's life. It's not Zenin, huh? Upon uttering that response, Toji slowly and calmly angled the sharpened edge of his once long and blunt cursed tool at the side of his head. In one swift and graceful motion that was faster than what Megumi could perceive, Toji rammed the sharpened edge of the playful cloud baton into his head, piercing his skull. He proceeded to twist it, allowing the edge to fully lodge into his cranium and guaranteeing a death blow. Now, Megumi was really confused. The man who tried so hard to kill him earlier was now committing suicide after he'd revealed his name. He couldn't even stop or ask the man any questions, as the man's in-process suicide had happened so fast that he couldn't even react in time to give a proper response. As Toji felt his consciousness fading and his body shutting down, he simply stared at his extremely confused son, feeling a sense of strange and grateful pride for his son that was and would be a better person than he ever was. He felt a drop of liquid roll down his cheek and heard it splash on the ground, his heightened senses still unintuitively sharp even as he neared death's door, though he wasn't sure whether it was blood flowing from the puncture wound or a tear from his eye. Toji had firmly believed that he'd never shed a tear again after his wife's death. Maybe he was wrong. With his last breath, Toji passed his final words to his son before he died a second time. I'm glad. Looking back in his life, he wondered if things could have been better for Megumi if he hadn't left. If he wasn't a coward to overcome his past. If he'd made the effort to live up to his wife's hopes for him. What would she think of me? His wife had pulled him out of the trauma born of his past, helping him believe that he'd truly been healed from the mental scars during the years when he was treated as less than human in the Zenin clan. She managed to repair a very broken man. Yet upon her death for natural causes, said man went right back to being broken, even more perhaps, returning to his vices and worse. Furthermore, he'd allowed his pride to overcome his instincts. In hindsight, he should have hightailed the hell out the moment he saw a very insane dead man walking. Instead, he fought a battle he had no chance of winning in the first place, getting himself killed for essentially nothing in the process. Too late to do anything now. Toji could only admit that hard truth as he neared death. Knowing that his son kept his name, along with dying to save his son and dying on his own terms allowed Toji die gladly, as he'd fulfilled a purpose unlike the first time. In both times, he thought of Megumi. How ironic. He'd always loved the son he abandoned, no matter how hard he tried to convince himself that he didn't care. Closing his eyes for the final time, Toji accepted his fate, uncaring of whatever that awaited him. With that, Toji Fushiguro died a second time, leaving the world of sorcerers and curses once again. Death, however, was not the true end for Toji Fushiguro, for his soul and memories reawakened in another world far more different than his own. Izuku slowly rose to the surface of consciousness, escaping from the depths of his mind, gradually awakening from his deep slumber and becoming increasingly conscious and aware. In his swim to the surface, however, he was bombarded by foreign memories that flooded his mind and soul. In his memory of this world, there was no such thing as quirks, only jujitsu and sorcerers. The first memory of note he experienced was when his mother hung herself from a cherry tree after realizing he didn't have something called cursed energy. He heard some of his relatives talking about how her body spoiled the view. It certainly did. Even the weakest, most pathetic monkeys have a tiny drop of cursed energy. But you have nothing. Then he remembered years upon years of abuse, where he was thrown into a chamber filled with horrible creatures that he could never even imagine existed. All of this was in the name of special training. There were dozens of them in the chamber. Almost every single day, he fought for his life, trying his hardest to kill every creature in there, using his fists and anything he could get his hands on, even using his teeth at times and biting madly at the creatures in hopes of hurting even one of them. Cursed spirits, they were called. When the pain was too much to bear, or when his body gave in to exhaustion, the creatures swarmed him like flies to a corpse, eating him alive. In those moments, he wanted the pain to end so badly. But no matter how much damage he suffered, both mentally and physically, his body would never give in to the injury. He would always awaken on a bed covered in bandages, having been carried out by someone before death could take him away. The moment that he recovered from his injuries, he would be thrown back into the chamber, repeating the cycle of torment. In between his normal and special training that lasted for hours on end, he felt himself lose track of time and his surroundings. Because it's all filled with the same pain. Whenever he got used to the same pain, a new one would come along. And all he could do was to endure it. Endure it. Endure it. Endure it. On one fateful day, when he was 14 years old, everything changed. He was in the chamber, enduring the same pain as usual. Somehow, on that day, he'd been driven the closest he'd ever been to death. A large cursed spirit resembling a lizard landed a particularly critical blow on him, throwing him into a wall with enough force to break it. The blow was aimed at his chest, shattering his rib cage and partially collapsing one of his lungs. As he lied on the floor, coughing up blood, struggling to breathe, he thought that he'd finally die for good. At least I'll be free. But instead of death claiming his soul, something awakened within him. He grabbed a piece of debris from the wall that was strewn on the ground. His body hurt so much, but he didn't care. He rushed the cursed spirit, grappling himself onto the spirit and slamming the rock into its head. Again, again, and again. He couldn't remember much of what happened after that. He only recalled being covered in blood and being baked in the stench of cursed spirits when they came to bring him out of the chamber. He once overheard a few of the clan members talking about how many cursed spirits there were in the chamber. Apparently, there were about 50, mostly ranging from grade 3 and grade 2, with a few grade 1s in the mix. He fucking killed all of them. From that day onwards, whenever they threw him into the chamber again, he would emerge unscathed and smiling. They could no longer torment him, not when he enjoyed it. No matter what was down there, he would kill it and relish every moment of it. Ah, the thrill. A few years later, he heard some gossip about how the entire clan was at his mercy, of how he could kill everyone in the clan whenever he wanted to. Even the Hei, led by the clan head Nobito Zenin, would be powerless to stop him. Everyone knew it, but no one wanted to admit it. He was the strongest person in the Zenin clan. Once they realized it, everyone in the clan began to fear him, even Nobito. Fortunately for the clan, that moment would never come to pass, as he'd left the clan soon after. After leaving the clan, he worked as an assassin, becoming the infamous sorcerer killer in the jiu-jitsu world, successfully completing over 200 contracts and bounties. Yet he felt aimless, doing it for the money and to pass time. Because that's all he learned to do. Killing. Despite the circumstances, he managed to find love and started a family. Those were the happiest moments of his life. He even had a son. When his wife died, however, his life reverted back to his old ways, as if nothing had happened. At first, there was no major change, but everything went downhill the moment he decided to take that job to kill the snow-haired boy with the 6 eyes and Limitless. The end result of this job was his death, leading to his unnatural revival and a series of blurry experiences that resulted in his death again. All these were the memories of Toji Fushiguro. Izuku experienced all of these memories firsthand. He felt everything. The pain, the struggle, the wrath. He felt it all. When experiencing and living in those memories, he wasn't himself. He was Toji Fushiguro. In fact, he'd become Toji Fushiguro. Or was he always Toji Fushiguro? Essentially, he lived an entire lifetime in a flash. Izuku Midoriya didn't exist in that lifetime. Well, who am I? The memories and experiences of the two very different lifetimes deeply confused his mind. After all, suddenly receiving a second set of memories and experiences completely different to your original life was bound to scramble anyone's mind. Am I Toji Fushiguro? Or Izuku Midoriya? Toji Midoriya? Izuku Fushiguro? God, thinking about it in that way sounded corny as hell. Eventually, he somehow felt the shape of his soul, as strange as it sounded. He didn't know how to describe it. He simply felt it. Feeling the shape of his soul, he discovered that his soul was a fusion of Izuku Midoriya and Toji Fushiguro's souls. However, Izuku Midoriya was still the base of the soul despite fusing with Toji's soul. That means I'm still Izuku. As he arrived at this conclusion, Izuku neared the surface of consciousness, ready to face whatever that came next. Izuku's eyelids began to flutter open, slowly but gradually opening. He could tell that he was lying down, feeling himself laying on a soft mattress with a pillow under his head, covered by a comfortable blanket. His face was turned upwards to the ceiling with lights blinding him, causing him to wince. Once his eyes had gotten used to the light, he tried to rise up to a sitting position despite his body aching with pain. As he slowly sat up, he felt someone rushing over and hugging him. It was his mom. She was bawling her eyes out, the tears flowing out without reservation, mixed with fragments of sentences and broken words that escaped her quivering lips in a desperate attempt to articulate the concern and shock she felt. Awkwardly, Izuku could only hug back as he let his mom cry a river for about a minute or so before she calmed herself down enough to say something that sounded coherent and understandable. However, in the midst of hugging her, he noticed something strange. There was light surrounding her in the shape of her body, almost like an aura that was radiated by her body. He couldn't find words to describe the color of the light, as its color was beyond what the human mind could conventionally perceive. Upon laying his eyes on this phenomena, Izuku immediately knew what it was. The shape of the soul. The shape of the soul appeared as a strange light that encompassed the body. The body is the soul, and the soul. Izuku understood this very clearly. In spite of this, the shape of the soul was not completely static. It undulated and shifted in response to the individual's thoughts, memories, and emotions. However, Izuku could never fully understand how it shifted. He could only perceive it. So this is what Toji sees. Guess I'll have to get used to it. Izuku, you're finally awake. Heave, please. Please don't you ever dare doing anything like that again. I'm so sorry, Dash. Mom, it's not your fault. Izuku interjected. He recalled his life as Toji, where he'd never felt love or compassion from anyone except his wife. Shit that felt weird to think about. Tears also began to well up in his eyes, streaming down slowly. I should be the sorry one here. What I did hurt you the most, he continued on, not wanting to see his mom to blame herself for his stupid, horrible mistake of trying to take his own life. Having Toji's memories and experiences allowed him to truly appreciate his life as Izuku. Even as a quirkless person, he'd never suffered as much and as severely as Toji did. More importantly, the experience had allowed him to value his family even more than ever, especially his mom. Eventually, once both of them calmed down enough from their sobbing session, Izuku began to ask questions about what had happened. So, what happened after I fell? He queried sheepishly, cringing mentally at his decision. Some passerbys found you and called for an ambulance. According to them, they thought you were dead, but one of them mustered the courage to check your pulse and found that you were still alive. Inko's face shifted into a slightly grim look, painting to continue her account. The doctors said that you'd fractured your skull and spine, along with a few limbs. Several of your internal organs were badly bruised. A few of your muscles also tore. The worst injury was the brain hemorrhage. Initially, they said that even if you woke up, you'd likely be a vegetable. I was so scared. You underwent so many surgeries, she recalled. Suddenly, her tone shifted slightly into that of disbelief, as if she was thinking of something she couldn't understand. But then a few days after all the surgeries were done, the doctors told me your body was recovering at an unbelievable rate. They said that in your condition, it would have taken a minimum of 1 year for your body to fully recover. But somehow your body had already been healed from up to 75% of the injuries. A slight smile crept onto Inko's face. They even asked me if I was lying when I told them that you didn't have a quirk. How long was I out for? Izuku questioned after hearing his mom's explanation of events. If we count today, then you've been comatose for 6 days, she replied. Are there any lasting effects from the injuries? He continued. I'm not so sure, right. I'm supposed to get the doctors here once you woke up. They can explain it better than I can. Just give me a moment while I get the doctors, okay? Izuku. Sure, Mom, he approved. Temporarily ending their conversation, Inko smiled and left the room to get the doctors, leaving Izuku alone in the room. Taking a look around the room, he found nothing special. The room resembled the hospital rooms you'd see in movies and shows. Clean, white, filled with medical equipment. The usual. There was an armchair in the corner, likely where his mom sat while she waited for him to awake from his coma. Finishing his survey of his surroundings, he began to inspect his body, finding himself clothed in a hospital gown. His body ached slightly when he moved, but it wasn't too bad. Compared to what he experienced as Toji, this was nothing. Expectedly, his hands and legs were bandaged, along with a few bandages that he could feel covering his chest. Notably, there was an 4-tube connected to his left wrist. But what arguably shocked him the most the fact that he was wearing a fucking adult diaper. Never in his life would he think to find himself wearing an adult diaper. But it was understandable, considering that he was in a coma. Luckily, he didn't wake up with piss or shit in the diaper. Sighing, Izuku placed his right hand onto his face in shame. Upon doing so, however, he received his second shock after awaking from his coma. There was a wound dressing patch on the right side of his face, more specifically covering a part of his cheek and the edge of the right side of his lip. Shit, that scar followed me here. He always hated that scar. It was the first scar he'd received after being thrown into the chamber as Toji. It was the greatest reminder of what he'd suffered. So much for the body being the soul, and the soul being the body. In all honesty, he should have expected this when he realized that Toji's soul had fused with his. On the subject of souls, it seemed that he had retained his heavenly restriction from his lifetime as Toji. Given his ability to perceive the shape of souls and healing factor, this fact was undeniably confirmed. Whether he would or should pass it off as a quirk was a different matter he'd worry about later. Removing his hand from his face and glancing at said hand, Izuku merely smiled. He wondered how a heavenly restricted person would interact with this world of quirks. But one thing was for certain. It was going to be interesting. A pleasure to meet you, Mr. Midoriya. I'm glad to see that you're awake. Thank you, and your dash? Izuku asked. The man before him smiled. Dr. Miyazaki, trauma surgery specialist for Watanabe Memorial Hospital. I'm the doctor who performed most of your surgeries you underwent and the main doctor assigned to your case. Dr. Miyazaki appeared to be a man in his mid-40s that possessed a thin face, a side effect of his busy life as a doctor. Beneath his eyes were mild dark circles, indicating that he hadn't slept enough for the past few days. His hair was neatly combed to one side, showing signs of graying at the roots. In terms of facial appearance, he was relatively average-looking, not possessing any indicators of what his quirk could be. His figure was tall and slender, briefly reminding Izuku of a stick bug. He was dressed in a collared black button-up shirt, covered by an unbuttoned doctor's overcoat. Currently, he was seated on a chair positioned on the left side of Izuku's bed. Looking at him, Izuku didn't sense anything weird or off about the man. If there was anything truly strange or concerning, his heightened senses would give him a tingle or hunch. Dr. Miyazaki appeared to be, as he was, a simple and caring doctor that was here to help. Still smiling, Dr. Miyazaki continued. Now that our introductions are done, I'd like to begin my explanation regarding your current condition. Is that all right? Sure, doctor, but before we start, I'd like to ask Dash. Other than my mom, who are all these other people in the room? Izuku questioned. Dr. Miyazaki wasn't the only doctor in his room. Excluding Dr. Miyazaki, there were 4 other doctors in the room. There was nothing noteworthy about them, except that one of them had red horns protruding from his forehead. They stood in different parts of the room. Well, 3 of the doctors were seated in their own chairs. Only one of them was actually standing. All of them appeared to be simultaneously monitoring him and recording something into the note boards held in their hands. Furthermore, there was one other man that stood out, also standing in a corner of the room. The man was dressed differently compared to the doctors, wearing a dress shirt and tie complemented by a beige trench coat that was buttoned. He appeared to be in his early 30s, clean-shaven and sporting a mop of black hair. He was also tall, but his physique was far bulkier than Dr. Miyazaki's physique. His face appeared to be in a calm and interested expression. If the man was dressed in a white coat, Izuku would have assumed that he was another doctor. These are my colleagues. Pay them no mind. They're only here to have a look, as your case is most certainly bizarre, to say the least, Dr. Miyazaki explained, casually dismissing the presence of his colleagues. Makes sense. Directing his hand at the man in the beige trench coat, Dr. Miyazaki further clarified. This fine gentleman here, is Detective Naomasit Tsukachi. He has some questions for you later once I've finished my explanation on your current condition. Detective Tsukachi extended his hand. Pleased to meet you, Mr. Midoriya. Izuku accepted his hand and shook it. Same to you. Anyhow, let's begin, Dr. Miyazaki reminded. With that being said, Dr. Miyazaki began a roughly 15-minute in-depth explanation of the injuries Izuku sustained after his fall. The whole explanation was in Izuku's opinion pretty boring, filled with medical terminology and riffraff that Izuku couldn't be bothered to fully understand save for a few words. The explanation that his mom had given him was more than enough. If he was still just Izuku, he probably would have paid full attention to what Dr. Miyazaki said. Alas, things have changed. Completing his detailed summary on Izuku's injuries, Dr. Miyazaki continued on to the part that everyone wanted to hear about, regarding Izuku's miraculous recovery. I presume that your mother has already told you about this, so I'll just say it again. Your rate of recovery is astounding. To recover from such severe injuries in the span of a few days is impossible for a quirkless individual. Even if we had someone with a strong healing quirk like Recovery Girl to speed up the recovery process, we could at most speed up your recovery by a few months. At your current rate of recovery, we could possibly discharge you within the next 2 or 3 days. And for you to recover with seemingly no complications, it's quite unbelievable, he added, appearing to be in slight disbelief as he finished his sentence. Izuku was amused by his doctor's bewilderment. He had to bite his tongue to prevent himself from grinning at the doctor and chuckling, so that everyone else present wouldn't think that there was something wrong in his head. How is this happening? Surely there's an explanation. Izuku questioned his doctor, but was unable to completely hide his amusement. It slipped out in the tone of his voice. Hopefully no one noticed. And lucky for him, no one in the room noticed his slip in tone. Either that, or everyone was really good at hiding that they had noticed his slip. The former scenario was more likely. Dr. Miyazaki carried on. At the moment, we doctors are rather unsure ourselves. Ideally, one could argue that you experienced a quirk awakening through your near-death experience. However, the oldest recorded age for a quirk awakening in medical history is 8 years old. If that was the case, your awakening would be a first in history. Me and most of my colleagues proposed and agreed on this idea at first. However, there are several holes in this theory. The biggest being the fact that you have a double-jointed pinky toe, a guaranteed sign of quirklessness. Not a single person with a double-jointed pinky toe has ever awakened a quirk at any age. Dr. Miyazaki's explanation reminded Izuku of his own habit of talking to himself, further increasing his amusement. Grabbing a plastic water bottle from his coat, Dr. Miyazaki took a quick sip to quench the dryness of his mouth from talking so long before continuing. Of course, all of this is purely hypothetical. With enough time, we could potentially find a logical explanation for your recovery. Standing up from his seat, Dr. Miyazaki concluded his explanation. For now, that's all I can say regarding your current condition. I'll leave the rest to Detective Tsukachi. But before I leave, is there anything else you'd like to ask? I don't think so, Izuku replied. Completing their conversation, Dr. Miyazaki left the room, followed suit by his colleagues, leaving his mom and Detective Tsukachi as the only other people left in the room. Tsukachi plopped himself into Dr. Miyazaki's empty seat, but before he began to question Izuku, he turned to Inko first. I'm sorry, Mrs. Midoriya, but would you mind leaving the room while I question Mr. Midoriya? It's standard operating procedure for us detectives to only involve ourselves and the victim during the questioning process. For confidentiality purposes, he requested. Of course, Detective, Inko was slightly surprised by the detective's request, but complied with it. Seeing her slight surprise, Tsukachi smiled to ease any worry she might have had. You don't need to worry, Mrs. Midoriya. Assuming that everything goes smoothly, it won't take long for the questioning to be done. Inko smiled in response and stood up, preparing to leave the room. Before she left the room, she told Izuku one more thing. Izuku, be honest with him and don't hide anything. Inko proceeded to leave the room, allowing Tsukachi to proceed with his questioning. Detective Tsukachi pulled out a device that looked to be some kind of recorder and placed it on a table next to Izuku's bed. "What's with the recorder?" Izuku asked. "It's for documentation and evidence, safekeeping purposes. Don't worry about it," answered Tsukachi. Clarifying the presence of the recorder, Tsukachi pressed a red button on it, turning it on. Tsukachi began. "Now, Mr. Midoriya, I'd like to ask some questions regarding your suicide attempt. Is that uncomfortable for you?" "Nope," Izuku blatantly replied. "Firstly, would you tell me what you were able to remember in the moments before your suicide attempt?" Izuku proceeded to give a simplified testimony of the events that occurred after he got onto the rooftop at Aldera, cutting out the more unbelievable parts, of course. As Izuku was retelling his experience, Tsukachi realized something very concerning. My quirk isn't working on him. Contrary to what the other officers and detectives believed, his quirk wasn't a simple yes and no lie detection quirk. He always found it funny about how people assumed that about his quirk. In truth, his quirk was far more complex than that. In simple terms, his quirk allowed him to sense the brain activity of a person near him. Through years of experience living with his quirk, he could roughly sense whether someone was hiding information or telling the truth based on the way their brain responded when he asked a question. The quirk wasn't absolute, however, as delusions were considered a form of truth, producing near indistinguishable brain activity comparable to someone that told the truth. Only common sense and logic would allow him to determine if there was any real truth behind illusions. For the first time in his life, his quirk didn't work on someone. When he used his quirk on Izuku, he couldn't sense any brain activity. It was impossible that his quirk suddenly stopped working. It was working fine when he used it on Dr. Miyazaki and Mrs. Midoriya just minutes ago. Even for someone unconscious, there would still be a slight amount of brain activity, but in Izuku's case, there's completely nothing. The only cases where his quirk wouldn't work on someone was if they were dead or in a vegetative state, where brain activity was zero. But as clear as day, Izuku Midoriya was alive and talking to him. It was like facing a blank wall, or more precisely an inanimate object. If Detective Tsukachi wanted to be creative, he'd dub Izuku an invisible man that was before him. Stunned by this revelation, Tsukachi's eyes briefly widened. He tried to quickly brush it off, something that Izuku took notice of. "Looks like he tried to use his quirk on me, probably something mind-based. Guess he's shocked that it didn't work on me." If Izuku had to guess, it was likely related to how certain quirks didn't work or weren't as effective on someone with a heavenly restriction, assuming that he equated Toji's experiences against cursed techniques with his own understanding of quirks. "Is there something wrong, detective?" Izuku subtly mocked, deciding to play around with the detective's shock a bit. Quickly regaining his composure, Tsukachi responded, "Not at all. Please continue." "Damn it, focus, Naomasa. You can figure that out later." If his quirk wasn't going to work, he could at least rely on the basic skills of a detective, such as observation and deduction, to help him during his questioning of Izuku. After Izuku had finished his account, Detective Tsukachi moved on to his next question. "Next, during your suicide attempt, what were your feelings and thoughts?" The question sounded rather insensitive, but as a detective he needed all the information he could get. Rates of quirkless suicides were rising fast these days. Most of the time, these people were victims of bullying and abuse. He found it abhorrent that such incidents were so prevalent in their society. Whenever he heard of such cases, he tried his best to find those who were responsible and hold them accountable through the power of the law. He suspected that Mr. Midoriya was one of these individuals that fortunately survived. Izuku sighed. "It was like my body was on autopilot. I felt hopeless. I wanted to get rid of my useless self. Even as I fell, I didn't have any regrets. It was only after I woke up and saw my mom that I realized how foolish I was." Tsukachi nodded in response. "Matches up with what you wrote in that suicide note." Moving on, "Do you have any idea when these thoughts and feelings started?" He followed up. "Well, it's just that a lot of people around saw me as someone that was useless, someone who wouldn't amount to anything in his life. I guess their treatment got to me. I see. Were you bullied or abused by those around you, such as your friends in school? Izuku paused for a while. You could say that. Is there anyone specific that coerced or influenced you? Any names? No. That was a fat lie on Izuku's end. Tsukachi was taken aback by Izuku's answer. Mr. Midoriya, I can only help you if you're honest with me. Are you? No. Izuku firmly repeated. Tsukachi stared at Izuku, face filled with concern. Look, I can promise that whoever that drove you to do this will be held accountable and be punished accordingly. You don't need to be scared, he pleaded. No, Izuku reaffirmed unflinchingly. Tsukachi scanned for any signs of fear or hesitation on Izuku's face, but instead found that his facial expression was deadpan. Tsukachi could have sworn that Izuku's face even looked mildly annoyed. In fact, there was something unsettling about the way Izuku looked at him. There was no concrete way to identify it. He was only able to recognize it through years of experience in interrogation and questioning villains. Izuku's face didn't show it, but his eyes appeared cold and calculating, as if he was analyzing something in disturbing curiosity. Not too dissimilar to how a wolf would look at its prey. He's just a kid. You're imagining things, Naomasa. The reality was that Izuku didn't care anymore. Spending a lifetime as Toji gave him a new perspective on people like Bakugo. Toji was taking a stroll around the Zenin estate when in the corner of his eye, he noticed a small black mass that moved towards him. His heightened perception allowed him to instantly know who it was the moment said person entered his field of view. With a simple glance that didn't even move his head, he could tell that the person approaching him was a little boy with black hair running towards him, his mouth in a wide smile and eyes filled with joy. The little boy was Naoya Zenin, Naobito's spoiled brat. The boy was deemed a prodigy by almost every member of the Zenin clan, having inherited Naobito's projection sorcery technique. Everyone talked about how he was going to succeed Naobito as clan head. Naoya came to see him, likely after hearing about how he didn't have even a drop of cursed energy. The boy probably wanted to see how pitiful he was, to laugh and jeer at him. As Naoya approached Toji, however, the wide smile vanished from his face, the joy emptying from his eyes. A mix of terror and awe filled his face, leaving him physically shaken. Toji continued with his leisurely stroll as he passed Naoya, unbothered to spare even a second glance at the boy. Naoya, like the rest of the clan members, were nothing to him. At most, they were like rabbits. In the end, Bakugo and the schoolmates that bullied him were just like Naoya. Rabbits. Like rabbits. They weren't worthy of Izuku's attention. Worthless. He couldn't be bothered to deal with rabbits. Sure, if they attacked him, he could humor them, maybe even play with them. But if he ultimately wanted to, he could crush them all with a single step. Though he wouldn't, because it'd be a waste of time and create extra work for him. For him to bother and do any extra work because of rabbits was unnecessary and idiotic. With Toji's experiences and memories accompanied by a heavenly restriction, this perception was no longer just a mere thought. It was a fact. He let himself be influenced by rabbits once before, believing that he was less than them. But he wasn't going to let it happen again. A wolf doesn't concern himself with the opinions of rabbits. Only a fool would be concerned over rabbits. Besides, it would be far more interesting to see if Bakugo's antics would lead him to more trouble in the future, where he would risk losing more as a hero in training. He'd be lying if he said that he didn't find Bakugo's future being ruined by his own actions satisfying. Wanting to ease Detective Tsukachi's concerns as his boredom was beginning to grow, Izuku began an emotionally driven rant on how he blamed himself for his decision, and about how others around him didn't deserve to have their lives ruined by a decision that was purely his choice. He thought that his rant sounded convincing, considering his years of dealing with many varieties of clients, as Toji boosted his conversational and persuasion skills by a great margin. Most of what he spouted out was mainly bullshit that he thought of on the spot. It would be laughably pathetic if he felt anything for those so beneath him. He just wanted the detective to move on to the next question. In his mind, Tsukachi felt defeated. If the victim wasn't willing to provide a name for investigation or press charges, there was nothing he could do to help. Unfortunately, due to his quirk not working on Izuku, he was unable to find any ways to nudge the conversation in a favorable direction. He also couldn't detect anything notable in body language and facial expression that signaled to him that Izuku was lying. I can't sense his brain activity, and he doesn't want to press charges against whoever that influenced his suicide attempt in the first place. But he also seems to not care that much about what happened, wanting to get over it as soon as possible. In his eyes, something's up, but what exactly? Despite this unresolved mystery, Tsukachi decided to end his questioning session with Izuku. He felt dour on the inside, but appeared fine on the outside. Stopping the recorder, then shoving it into his trench coat, Tsukachi rose from his seat, thanking Izuku for his time. "Thank you for your time, Mr. Midoriya. If you have anything that you'd like to ask, or if you change your mind about pressing charges, you can contact me." As he said that, he handed Izuku his business card. The white card was engraved with Detective Tsukachi's full name and contact details in black lettering. "Nice card." Izuku placed the card on his bedside table. "Get well soon," Tsukachi wished to Izuku, promptly leaving the room. Once Detective Tsukachi left, Inko returned into the room, sitting in the seat where Dr. Miyazaki and Detective Tsukachi had previously sat. "What did he question you about?" she curiously asked. Izuku recapped his entire session with Detective Tsukachi. He gave an honest account of the whole questioning session, but didn't divulge his inner thoughts for obvious reasons. Once he was finished, his mom expectedly processed his decision to not press any charges or provide any names to Detective Tsukachi. "Izuku, are you sure about not pressing charges? Your schoolmates were the ones who caused you to do this in the first place," she concernedly protested. "Yeah, I don't blame anyone else but myself. I stupidly made that choice," he admitted. "But Mom, trust me. It's fine," Izuku reassured, looking at her with a firm but kind gaze. In that moment, Inko saw a resoluteness in her son that barely appeared ever since that fateful day where he found out that he was quirkless. "I trust you, Izuku," she conceded. "Thanks, Mom," Izuku said as he leaned forward to give his mom a hug. As they hugged, Izuku felt teary-eyed. Admittedly, one of the reasons that he chose not to press charges was to not trouble his mom with the challenges of litigation. Letting go of their hug, Inko had another question to ask Izuku about. "Izuku, even if you don't plan on pressing charges, do you want to transfer to another school so that these people don't hurt you again?" "No need. There's only a few months left before the school year ends. Then I'll start high school. Besides, this whole experience gave me a new perspective on how to deal with them. I can handle it," Izuku reasoned, filled with an air of confidence and subtle arrogance. Inko felt mildly hesitant, but accepted his answer anyway. "If you say so, honey. Also, can you ask Dr. Miyazaki to come over again? There's something I want to ask him," he added. "Sure, Izuku," she replied, accepting his request. Within minutes, Dr. Miyazaki was back in Izuku's room. Once the doctor was seated, Izuku began his question. "Doctor, is it fine if I share my theory on how my body is recovering so quickly?" he asked. He formulated the theory in the midst of his boredom while Dr. Miyazaki was explaining about his injuries. Dr. Miyazaki politely accepted. Of course. There's no harm in sharing an opinion. In fact, sometimes even we medical professionals need an outsider's perspective to solve certain problems." Receiving Dr. Miyazaki's go-ahead, Izuku proceeded to explain his theory. "I'm probably wrong, but my theory is related to the quirk factor. Everyone knows that all humans have the quirk factor. Even quirkless people do, as long as they have an ancestor that had a quirk. And I'm not trying to brag, but what if my body was supposed to be born with a strong quirk, but it didn't manifest due to a mutation in my quirk factor? Maybe when I had my near-death experience, I was supposed to awaken a strong quirk to help me survive. But since the quirk factor in my body didn't recognize the presence of a quirk and couldn't awaken it, the quirk factor mutated again, somehow enhancing my body far beyond its normal limitations to help me survive. The entire theory was mostly hypothesized based on Toji's knowledge, mixed with Izuku's current knowledge about quirks. That whole explanation was definitely more Izuku than Toji. Dr. Mizuki processed the theory with great interest, in contrast to Inko, who appeared confused by what Izuku had said. It's a very interesting theory that you've proposed. The theory does break some conventional information about quirks. However, information on quirk genetics is never static, evolving every year as a result of more and more previously thought impossible quirks appearing. Simply put, your theory might be feasible, commented Dr. Miyazaki. I'm afraid I can't comment much about the validity of your theory, though, as I'm not that knowledgeable when it comes to the field of quirk genetics. I'll refer your theory to a few of my colleagues who are genetic specialists to determine whether it could be possible, Dr. Miyazaki added. I'm curious, though, if your theory was accepted or deemed possible. What name would you give it? He queried. Izuku smirked. Let's call it a heavenly restriction. Wow, I did not expect my second FIC to get this much attention, so thanks a lot. Forgot to mention it in Chapter 1, but Toji's backstory is based on this fan comic that I recommend everyone to read. https://comic.cc/comic/hibernation.c8. Sorry if this chapter is kinda boring. Next chapter will have Izuku meeting an old friend, or at least the MHA version of him, and finally some action. Also, I need some thoughts regarding whether I should introduce similar versions of Toji's cursed tools, e.g. Playful Cloud or ISOH that happens to cancel emitter quirks, into the world of MHA, or should create some new weapons for Izuku, or do both at the same time. Also, FIC is on hiatus until March due to some IRL stuff. Please don't be there. Izuku looked in the mirror as he removed the white wound dressing patch that covered the right corner of his mouth, carefully peeling the patch away in anticipation. He hoped that the wound had healed up completely, or at least healed in a way that didn't resemble Toji's scar. To no one's surprise, the moment the patch came off, he could see the same vertical scar that Toji had. The same cut, the same size, and nearly the same position on his face, too. The scar hadn't fully healed, still slightly reddish in color. Once it was fully healed, only then would it truly be identical to Toji's scar. Focusing on the scar, he sighed. So that scar really followed me here? Damn. Izuku brushed over the scar with his right hand, feeling its rough texture. He brushed over the scar a few more times before deciding to stop. A tsich slipped out of his mouth, mildly disappointed and annoyed by the presence of the scar on the right corner of his mouth. Despite having the scar as Toji for so long, he still disliked the scar as it reminded him of the Zenin clan's cruelty towards him. Admittedly, it was very petty for him to care over such a small scar. Making a fuss over something as minor as this was useless and unnecessary. He lived with it as Toji, and he'll live with it as Izuku. Exiting his bathroom and entering his room, Izuku performed some morning stretches, simultaneously taking the opportunity to plan today's routine. As Dr. Miyazaki predicted, Izuku was discharged 3 days after he awakened from his coma. According to the various doctors that carried out physical and psychological exams on him to determine whether or not he was fit for discharge, Izuku was perfectly healthy, as if he'd never fallen in the first place. The only indication that he'd suffered any sort of injuries were the scars that he'd gotten from the fall, along with several more that appeared after his surgeries. His notable scars included a long surgical scar that ran down his spine, a large scar on his left collarbone, where his clavicle had pierced his skin in an open fracture, for surgical scars on various areas on his chest as a result of repairing his rib fractures, an irregularly shaped scar similar in shape to a leaf on his left forearm, where he'd experienced a second open fracture, and lastly, 2 surgical scars that ran down his shins. There were also 2 surgical scars on his head, but they weren't visible due to being obscured by his hair. Other than that, there were also a few other minor surgical scars from repairing fractures scattered around his body. The only scar that bothered him was the lone scar on the right corner of his mouth. The doctor said that it was miraculous that he only suffered one injury to the face. In all honesty, he didn't mind having more scars on his face, as long as it was anything other than the single cut-shaped scar that served as a loathsome reminder. Based on his injuries, it seemed that the left side of his body took the brunt of the impact when he fell. Izuku assumed the reason that he had an abundance of scars was as a result of his heavenly restriction not fully manifesting immediately after he impacted the ground, providing him with an inferior healing factor. If his heavenly restriction was complete after he had his injuries, not a single injury would have left any scarring on his body. What was more shocking to the doctors, however, was that Izuku's physical condition was beyond peak. In fact, Izuku's body appeared to be similar in structure to someone with a strength-based quirk despite technically still being quirkless, his muscle density having increased by an extreme but undetermined amount. Izuku could still remember the wide eyes and gaping mouths the doctors had when they received the results. Upon receiving the results, all of the doctors approached him separately, requesting that they run more experiments and tests on him. Izuku refused all of their requests, proposing that he'd only accept if they were each willing to pay him 20 million yen, which was apparently slightly below half the yearly salary of an average surgeon in Japan. The doctors were obviously offended by his offer, finding it atrocious and unnecessary. In turn, they turned to begging Dr. Miyazaki for approval to run their tests on him. In response, Dr. Miyazaki claimed that he would deal with and look in the matter himself, demanding the doctors to calm down and not harass Izuku. On a less annoying note, his psychological assessment went smoothly. The psychologist determined him to be mentally stable in spite of his previous suicide attempt, deeming him fit for discharge without the need for medication. Even if he was forced to take medication, it would have been ineffective due to his heavenly restriction, granting his body a resistance and tolerance to the effects of medication and drugs. In total, he spent about 11 days in Watanabe Memorial Hospital, 8 of which that were spent in a coma. He arrived home yesterday, around the afternoon. The rest of his day at home involved him lazing around. The reason for this was because Dr. Miyazaki permitted a week-long medical leave for him to further rest and recuperate at home before returning to school, so he wasn't in a rush to get anything done. He mainly did a decent amount of self-reflection and spent some time compounding his thoughts about the changes that had transpired in his life so far. Izuku still wanted to save people and become a hero. Even after obtaining Toji's memories, experiences, and most significantly merging with a portion of Toji's soul, his core personality mostly remained the same, untainted by Toji's more abhorrent and villainous traits, e.g. Toji's willingness to kill innocent people, even 14-year-olds as long as he was paid to do it, or Toji's general indifference and uncaring nature towards those around him. Despite that, he wasn't completely clean. Toji's personality manifested in other more minor but still significant ways. For starters, taking human lives was no longer an issue for him. He wouldn't kill innocent people no matter the situation, but killing villains or criminals was no longer a moral dilemma for him. Secondly, he became more spiteful towards people that scorned him, such as Bakugo. Nonetheless, he wouldn't trouble himself with any plans of revenge, preferring not to waste his time and effort unless the blonde did something first. Then he would respond in kind. Still, though, it'd be fun to see Bakugo's face if he got into UA. Thirdly, he felt very inclined to avoid doing any extra work for free if he was capable of squeezing any money out of it. If it was something actually serious that posed any sort of real threat or urgency, he wouldn't hesitate to deal with it no matter what. For more mundane matters, however, there was no harm in trying to earn some extra cash. All 3 of the previous traits paled in comparison to the next one. The most damning personality trait of Toji that manifested in Izuku was a desire for the thrill of battle and the hunt. This bloodlust that Izuku subtly craved was undoubtedly why Toji chose a life of violence and crime instead of picking easier jobs like working in construction or being an athlete where he was guaranteed to dominate, given that the majority of people in the world of jujitsu and curses had no special abilities. What started as a job that Toji happened to be good at turned into a form of satisfaction and a pseudo-thrill, where the fun came with the challenge of ending a target's life. Toji's bloodlust was only tempered after he met his wife. Still, embers of this lust burned within Toji, remaining even after meeting his wife. Izuku didn't know what to make of this certainly malicious desire. He'd have to figure out later. Completing his morning stretches, Izuku turned to his closet and slid the closet door open, picking his clothes for the day. Carefully going through his clothes, he settled on a white sweatshirt and a pair of black tapered pants. Normally, he would have chosen a t-shirt and a pair of shorts as casual wear, but the sweatshirt and tapered pants felt weirdly attractive. Did Toji's sense of fashion rub off on me? As he changed from his sleeping clothes, Izuku also took some time to analyze his scrawny figure. Comparing his figure to Toji's was like comparing a twig to a brick. But it was nothing some training couldn't fix. After all, the UA entrance exams were about 9 to 10 months away. He still had time to improve his figure before the exam. Once he was done changing, Izuku ambled to the kitchen, where he opened a refrigerator and grabbed the breakfast his mom had prepared before leaving for work. His breakfast was some egg rice and miso soup. After heating his breakfast in a microwave, he absent-mindedly enjoyed the meal on the dining table, slowly consuming it without hurry. The breakfast was simple but tasted good. Toji's experiences taught him to appreciate even the simplest meals. After finishing his breakfast and doing the dishes, Izuku exited his and his mom's apartment and donned a pair of black slippers before leaving, intent on checking off one of the things for today's routine. Nothing of note happened as Izuku walked to his destination, save for him passing by a few strangers. He was thankful that he chose to wear a sweatshirt for the day, as anything that wasn't long-sleeved would have exposed the scars on his arms. His scarred arms would likely attract the gaze of most people that passed him. The scars didn't make him feel uncomfortable, but he didn't want any sort of annoying attention. For now, he preferred to keep a low profile. Soon enough, he arrived at his destination, that being Takoba Beach. The place was an absolute dump, a literal dump ever since someone left their junk on the beach a few years ago, causing other like-minded individuals to follow suit. From the road adjacent to the beach, Izuku could see that the beach was filled to the brim with waste. Piles upon piles of it covered the coastline in several patches, cramming the whole area. It left little open space for anyone who wanted to spend their time there, if any. Their selfishness turned the once pristine and white sands into an unsightly junkyard of scrap and trash. Izuku was surprised that the municipal council let the situation at the beach become this bad, but it wasn't completely unexpected. He heard rumors about how the municipal council was misusing some of their public maintenance funds. Whether it was as the rumors claimed or a mere case of incompetency, Izuku wasn't at the beach to verify it. His purpose for coming to the beach was to test the changes to his physical capabilities. As a man with a complete heavenly restriction, monster was a severe understatement to describe Toji's physical prowess. With a heavenly restriction, Izuku was guaranteed to possess physical qualities similar to Toji, albeit reduced due to his younger age and smaller body size. Izuku descended onto the beach, passing by heaps of junk clumped into mini hills before deciding on a scrapped refrigerator, moderate in size. It was a common sight among the piles of junk, with each pile hiding at least 2 or 3 fridges. He assumed that the fridge weighed at least 100 kilograms, making it perfect for the first part of his test. He wrenched the fridge from the junk pile, doing so with ease. Placing it in an open area, he attempted to lift the fridge with one hand, managing to do so with minimal effort. To put it into a regular person's perspective, it was as if lifting a small book. Continuing to test his limits, Izuku scoured for more similarly sized and weighted fridges, stacking them on each other and lifting them with one hand. Eventually, He reached 8 fridges before beginning to feel any kind of strain. Confident in his physical prowess, Izuku found a small scrap truck. The back of the truck was loaded with heaps of scrap metal, mixed with a few discarded electronic appliances. He lifted the truck off the ground using both hands, doing so with moderate effort. If he had to guess, the truck along with its load weighed a total of roughly 5 tons. However, he wasn't able to lift the load for long, lasting for about a minute before his arms gave in to exhaustion. Suddenly compelled by an intrusive thought, Izuku dragged the truck a distance away from the junk pile in front of him. Placing a foot on the truck, he prepared to launch the truck into the junk pile, just because. This feels vaguely familiar. Did Toji do something like this while he was under the effects of the old hag's technique? Izuku shoved the truck with a simple kick, causing it to barrel into the junk pile. The truck skidded in the sand before ramming into the junk pile, creating a strong collision that sent several pieces of junk flying. One of these pieces, a piece of scrap metal, flew towards Izuku's direction. Boredly, he dodged the chunk, sidestepping it easily. Proceeding to his next test, Izuku looked for something that was solid and durable. Eventually, he found a large black safe. It was close in height to him, just a little shorter. The lock of the safe was broken, revealing its empty interior and the reason as to why it was discarded. Too bad. Might have had something valuable inside. The safe seemed to be layered with thick metal, durably resistant and perfect for what he was about to do next. Laying the rectangular safe flat on the sandy ground, he raised his right hand and balled it into a fist, slamming it downwards into the safe. The punch was mediocre, lacking any serious strength with roughly average effort. For a normal person without any sort of quirk that enhanced strength, the effort used would have struggled to bruise a person, creating at most some mild pain that would quickly fade. In Izuku's case, such an action punched through the safe like a pile driver, shattering it into metal chunks. The safe was destroyed in a near instant, producing a loud boom followed by a dust cloud. In addition to destroying the safe, he'd also created a small crater about 1 meter in radius and 1/4 of a meter in depth. Waving the dust cloud away, Izuku processed the results. Satisfied with his strength test, Izuku decided to move on to the next main test, that being a speed test. Finding a large gap between 2 piles of junk, Izuku crouched slightly, leaning forward and readying himself for a straight dash from the coastline to the edge of the beach facing the road. Putting in some actual effort, he rushed towards the edge with a high-speed dash. During his dash, he appeared as a brief blur. If someone saw him as he dashed, they'd struggle greatly to track his movement. Some would even be completely unable to process the blinding speed that he moved at. In between 1 to 2 seconds, he'd reached the edge of the beach, covering considerable distance. The speed of his dash was very close to Toji's speed, just slightly slower. Despite this, Izuku was faster than a good number of the current pro heroes, barring the top-ranked heroes. Deciding to test his limits even further, Izuku returned to the coastline, removing his sandals, placing them aside, and rolling his pants up to his knees. He was going to try running on water. He vaguely remembered Toji running on water near effortlessly while fighting a humanoid octopus-looking cursed spirit. If Toji was fast enough to run on water, then he could probably do so too. At the edge of the water, Izuku took a deep breath, getting ready to replicate Toji's feat. Honestly speaking, he felt nervous, hoping that his legs wouldn't give in mid-run, causing him to fall into the sea and drenching his clothes in the process. It'd be a hassle to walk back to his house, soaking wet. Ankle deep in the water, Izuku began to run in the direction of the sea, gradually accelerating as he felt more and more weight in his steps. Slowly but surely, he was running on the sea as if he was running on land, akin to a sprinter in a race. During his run, a grin was plastered on his face. He could feel the wind blowing past him, pushing his messy green hair backwards and growing in intensity with each step he took. He could hear each splash of water that trailed behind him, rhythmically in sync with his steps. It all felt so calming and satisfying. To imagine that he was a mangled pile of flesh and bone that was on the verge of death, with impossible odds of survival, just a mere 2 weeks before was simply unbelievable, to say the least. He smiled even brighter. Now, he was doing something that most people with quirks could only dream of doing in their wildest dreams. What's happened to me? All of this, it's like a dream. He was quirkless, but he suddenly gained this power that only worked and was as powerful as it was exactly because he was quirkless. The heavenly restriction was so similar to a quirk, yet it was completely different in nature. Obtaining the memories and experiences, along with his soul merging with a man from another world, was like something out of some battle shonen manga from the past, before the age of heroes came and overtook the manga scene. It was real. The universe worked in mysterious ways. For as long as he wanted to enjoy the moment, he couldn't do it for too long. After a few minutes of sprinting on the sea, he returned to land, feeling winded and slightly sweaty. With his clothes mildly wet from the splashes of water, Izuku mentally analyzed what he learned from his tests, catching his breath at the same time. My strength's about 60% of Toji's and my speed's just a bit slower. But my stamina's really bad, so I'll have to work on that along with increasing my physical strength. Once he was done with his short rest, Izuku made his way to the road and out of the beach. Before leaving the beach, he turned to look at the beach one last time. For a moment, he pondered whether he should help clean up the beach. After all, the junk really did make the beach look ugly. There was enough junk around that just moving it out of the beach could potentially be a form of training to build muscle. Plus, he'd be doing his community a service. Nah, Izuku decided, turning his back on the beach and shrugging his shoulders. It was too much work to do so, and it wasn't his business unless he was paid for it. Besides, go to a gym to train would be far better, giving him access to equipment and machinery that allowed him to train more efficiently and easily plan his exercises. There was air conditioning in the gym too. With the subject of gyms popping into his mind, Izuku pulled his phone out of his pocket. As he pulled out his phone, he realized that being so close to the sea with his phone in his pocket may have been a bad idea. To his relief, his phone wasn't wet. He loaded up a search engine, searching for a suitable gym that was near where he lived. "Just fill up this form here and we're done," said the gym's counter-receptionist, casually explaining to Izuku what he needed to do. The gym's counter-receptionist was a young guy, probably in his 20s. Nothing stood out about him, if one ignored the brown reptilian tail that was wagging behind his back and his yellow, slitted eyes. If his skin color was the same as his tail, he'd look like some humanoid cursed spirit. Whatever, Izuku wasn't one to discriminate. "All right," Izuku replied. Izuku grabbed the black pen on the glass countertop, filling his personal information into the form. Once he was done, Izuku handed the form back to the gym's counter-receptionist. The receptionist smiled in response, exposing his fangs. "Thanks for choosing to be a member of our gym. Your membership starts tomorrow. About the membership card, it should be ready by next week. I hope that our gym is up to your standards. Stay fit and have a nice day," he pleasantly added. "You too," Izuku wished in turn. Completing the sign-up process for the gym's membership, Izuku turned for the exit. The gym was located in the Taguchi building at downtown Mizurufu, blatantly indicated by the large Taguchi name on the side of the building. The gym was also fittingly named the Taguchi Gym. The building was roughly a 20-minute walk away from Izuku and his mom's apartment building. Almost the whole building was a dedicated mega gym, occupying the ground to the third floors. The remaining 2 floors were occupied by the Taguchi Wellness Centers. Each floor of the gym was filled to the brim with exercise equipment, suited for all body types, sizes, and strength levels. The gym was also catered for those with more unique physiques that stemmed from mutant quirks. According to Izuku's observations and the online reviews on the gym was well-maintained, providing a comfortable training environment. Although the monthly membership fee was reasonable for the quality of the place, the regular fee per entrance without membership was absolutely ludicrous, undoubtedly an absolute scam to encourage more people to get a membership. Exiting the building, Izuku found himself on a bustling sidewalk. The sidewalk was filled with pedestrians, though it wasn't too crowded since it was a weekday and most people were still busy with their jobs. As he walked away from the building, Izuku fished his phone out to check the time and found that the time was close to noon. Seeing this, he decided that it would be convenient to get some takeout nearby. Once he was done waiting for the food along with walking back home, he'd probably be hungry enough for lunch. Strolling around the streets of downtown Mizutofu, Izuku eventually found an izakaya restaurant, a common type of restaurant in Japan that also doubled as a bar. The food in this type of restaurant was usually cheap and decently good for the money spent. Entering the izakaya, Izuku found himself a seat that was deeper into the izakaya. Soon, a waiter approached him, greeting him politely and handing him a menu. Once he picked his order, Izuku called the waiter over, confirming his order and adding that he wanted it packed for takeout. While waiting for his food, Izuku disinterestedly looked around the restaurant, noticing that more and more people were coming into the izakaya as lunch hour arrived. Not long later, his food, a katsudon dish, was ready, neatly packed in a container held by a plastic bag. Approaching the counter, Izuku paid about 1,100 yen for his food. As he turned around to leave, he noticed that the TV in the izakaya was playing something that was familiar to him. A live horse race was broadcasting on the TV, attracting the attention of several patrons, including Izuku. And they're off, with Mikazuki and Hayashi leading neck to neck. Aikawa is trailing close behind the two, followed by Akiyama and Sato. The rookie number 6 Ito appears to be gaining fast. Whether he overtakes Tanaka remains to be seen, announced the commentator enthusiastically. Izuku watched the race with interest as he walked through the restaurant towards the exit, head pointed in the direction of the TV. Might be fun to gamble again, but I don't have much to gamble, so it might be. Unexpectedly, Izuku felt himself bump into something. Looking forward, he found the left side of his torso in contact with the outstretched hand of another patron, a dark-haired middle-aged man with gray stubble. On the ground was a shattered glass of sake on the ground, the clear liquid contents exposed for all to see. Oops. Apparently, the man was regaling a grand story for his 3 other also middle-aged friends to hear. While Izuku was distracted and walking past the tables of other patrons, the middle-aged man had stretched his right hand out as a gesture to describe something. A glass of sake was loosely held in his hand. Accidentally, Izuku bumped into the middle-aged man's hand that was in the way, causing the man to drop his glass. Immediately, the man was infuriated. "Why?" he loudly exclaimed in anger, attracting the attention of everyone in the restaurant. His friends gave dirty looks at Izuku. Standing up to confront Izuku, the middle-aged man continued, "Look where you're walking, Bastadash." Before the man could fully stand up or complete his insult, he locked eyes with Izuku. "Why is he looking at me like that? What is this? How is he making me scared? He's just a kid." Izuku glared daggers at the man. If looks could kill, a dagger would have been stabbed clean through the man's throat and slashed through his torso from the throat. The middle-aged man weakly collapsed into his seat, feeling dread. The man's friends stared in confusion until they met with Izuku's eyes and understood the situation, becoming tense as well. In that moment, the man deeply feared for his life. After a few more seconds of glaring at the middle-aged man, Izuku sighed. "How much was your drink?" he asked. What?" the man stuttered out. "I asked, how much was your drink?" Izuku repeated. Breaking out of his daze, the man replied, 800 yen. Pulling his wallet out of his pocket, Izuku nonchalantly handed the middle-aged man a 1,000 yen bill. "Keep the change. Sorry for the trouble," Izuku apologized, trying to sound relaxed. Settling the problem, Izuku exited the izakaya, leaving the man stunned. 10 minutes or so after leaving the izakaya, Izuku was making his way home, walking on the sidewalk when suddenly he stumbled upon a strange sight. There was a floating purse going in the opposite direction that he was walking in, bumping into people around it. With a simple glance, Izuku could tell that it was a man running as fast as he could based on the shape of a soul that emitted around the purse. It appeared that an invisible man was holding the purse. Upon closer inspection, the man was camouflaged with his surroundings, attempting to cover the purse with his camouflaged arms. The camouflage wasn't perfect. The man's physical silhouette could still be seen, but to someone who wasn't paying attention, it would easily pass as invisibility. Izuku stared at the camouflaged man as he ran past him, observing what was happening when a red-headed young woman entered the scene soon after, chasing the camouflaged man. "That's my purse." "Thief!" she yelled out, catching the attention of the other pedestrians around. Hearing this, Izuku slowly turned around to the direction of the thief and handed his takeout to a random older lady next to him, much to her confusion. "Hold this for a second," he requested. He closed the distance between him and the thief with a single flash step, startling everyone around him with his speed. Grabbing the thief by his shoulder, Izuku turned the thief to face him, much to the thief's shock. A wadash was all the thief could say before Izuku's fist smashed into his face. Instantaneously, blood, saliva, and teeth flew out from the thief's mouth, splattering onto the concrete sidewalk. A few drops of blood landed on Izuku's clothes and face, staining his white sweatshirt with specks of red. The 3 teeth that flew out of the thief's mouth bounced on the ground, with one tooth landing on the shoe of a horrified bystander. If Izuku wanted to be pessimistic, he'd assume that his punch had broken the thief's jaw and cheekbones. To be honest, the punch was a love tap from Izuku. He didn't want to punch someone's head off or crush their skull into paste in broad daylight. Losing his focus, the thief disabled his camouflage as Izuku punched him, revealing his physical appearance. Before the thief flew from the force of Izuku's punch, Izuku grabbed the thief by his collar, pulling him closer. Reeling from the extreme pain and shock, the thief couldn't find the strength or focus to defend himself from Izuku, letting Izuku hold him limply. Rearing his fist, Izuku prepared to deliver a second blow to the man's face before stopping, realizing that beating an already defeated thief to a pulp wouldn't look good in the eyes of the public, considering that some of the bystanders had started to pull their phones out to record the beatdown. Izuku let go and dropped the man, who fell onto the ground like a sack of potatoes. The man was still conscious, but was too overwhelmed by the pain to move properly, breathing hard with terror and grasping his mouth that was still flowing with blood, wetting the ground with crimson spots. Knowing that staying too long would lead to him getting questioned by a pro-hero or the police, Izuku quickly turned away, wiping the specks of blood off his face and speed walking away from the crowd that had formed around the thief laying on the sidewalk. Luckily, the older lady that he entrusted his takeout with hadn't run away with the food, staring in awe and fear as Izuku approached her. Izuku thanked and took the plastic bag from her, wanting to leave the area as soon as possible. Before he could leave the area, however, the red-headed young woman trailed behind him and called out to him. "I can't thank you enough stopping that thief, mister," she thanked, profusely bowing in respect. "How can I repay you for helping me?" she added, intent on showing her gratitude. Izuku thought about it for a while, before deciding that getting some cash to cover for what he spent today would be nice. Izuku replied, "I just want 8,000 yen in return to cover for some things that I bought today." The price for that gym membership and card was reasonable, but not cheap. Hopefully his request wasn't too much for the red-headed woman to fulfill. Gladly, the woman opened her purse, handing Izuku a 5,000 yen note and 3 1,000 yen notes before thanking Izuku once again and leaving. Izuku shoved the notes into his pocket and continued on his way home. On his way home, Izuku was swiftly struck by an epiphany. I should be a bounty hunter. That way I can get that thrill and satisfy my urges while also earning some extra cash on the side, perfectly killing 2 birds with 1 stone. It was a great idea that made him feel stupid for not thinking about it earlier. He wouldn't hunt innocents and civilians as bounties, of course, but villains and criminals were fair game. Essentially, he would do some contracted vigilantism. Izuku grinned in anticipation for what he would soon do. After his epiphany on the way home, Izuku spent more time refining his thoughts. It wasn't befitting of someone who wanted to be a hero, but he believed it to be the most morally sound and optimal to get what he desired. To be fair, he also considered becoming a vigilante. The fact that he was quirkless might have been a loophole to bypass vigilantism laws. However, he preferred not to work for free. Options that allowed for extra benefits like monetary gain were more welcome in his eyes. In light of his morally reprehensible plan, becoming a pro-hero was still something that Izuku wanted. He did genuinely desire to help and save innocent people, and being a pro-hero would be the best way to do so. But being bound to act morally in the eyes of the public felt unsatisfying, for the lack of a better word, and left something more to be desired. Reflecting on the incident with the thief, Izuku supposed that he could have acted with less violence at the time. If all was as it seemed, the thief just had a camouflage quirk that wasn't dangerous and a nuisance at most. In hindsight, he should have just grabbed the thief by the shirt and held him in place until a pro-hero or police arrived for the arrest. Instead, he instinctively slammed his fist into the thief when it wasn't necessary in the first place. He held back, but he was already readying his arm for a second blow and likely a few more before reason kicked in. When his fist slammed into the thief's face, he appeared stoic in the eyes of the bystanders for stopping a criminal, even though the way he acted was questionably excessive. He did it to help, but there was a less noble side to it. Truth is, he enjoyed the moment. The moment his fist impacted into the thief's face. The enjoyment didn't come from dominating those lesser than him, like some villains would feel. No, it came from how alive he felt. He relished the heat of the moment. As the sorcerer killer, he killed with efficiency, preferring to not drag his task out for too long. After all, he was still doing a job with money on the line. That didn't mean that he didn't enjoy his job. Sure, part of the enjoyment came from hunting sorcerers and curse users alike as a man without cursed energy to prove that even a monkey could utterly destroy them. Yet there was always this lingering thrill and satisfaction that came from eliminating his targets and the fight that ensued. It made him feel more alive than anything else in his life, at least until he met his wife. It seemed that this feeling had become ingrained within Izuku. But a hero should never be like that. A hero wasn't a demon that lusted for battle and blood. A hero had to be someone who was focused on neutralizing a threat, restraining themselves to minimize harm for the sake of others around, cultivating a positive image for others to look up to, thus replicating that indescribable feeling that made him feel so alive was nigh unfeasible as a hero. He could never feel it by just being a hero. So what better way to feel alive than by hunting down the scum of society in the streets of Japan? It was fair game. The risk of being killed applied to everyone who chose to involve themselves in a life of crime and villainy. If a villain or criminal had done enough to warrant a large bounty or hit on their head, they likely deserved it. Toji was someone that hunted anyone as long as he was paid, even if they were completely. Izuku would be better than that, going after people that deserved it. The old Izuku who was nothing would call him a monster. But he didn't care. No longer was he this naive kid who completely believed in morality when dealing with villains and criminals. Living Toji's life exposed him to the worst of people. He gained an understanding that mercy wasn't a right, but a privilege. Ultimately, his perspective on a great deal of things changed for better or worse. Society believed that it would be selfish to do so, even if they deserved it. So what? Compared to what he was doing, there were far worse people and things to be concerned about. He would even be doing society a favor. Once he'd cleared his mind of his initial uncertainties and doubts, Izuku gave more thought to the plan itself. Getting involved in underground businesses, especially bounty hunting or contract killing, was difficult. Most of the time, a person had to be already neck-deep in a life of crime or have existing connections to involve themselves in such businesses without issue. For now, Izuku had none of that luxury. His best bet was to use the internet, more specifically the dark web. He'd come upon a handful of videos online before about the hidden side of the internet that harbored all varieties of illegal activities. Among said illegal activities were claims of websites, forums, and message boards that catered to bounty hunting or contract killing services. To do so, Izuku ended up spending roughly a day watching tutorials online on how to access the dark web. As Toji, he frequented anonymous websites for curse users to find jobs that were open. He used to do so personally until he met his old business partner Shu Kong. Knowing Kong saved him the hassle of finding jobs or contracts by himself. Although he had experience surfing the dark web during his lifetime as Toji, Izuku expected to face some trouble. The era difference of about 200 years between his and Toji's world led to a more complex online environment that was completely different compared to Toji's time. Surprisingly, it wasn't as complicated as he expected to access the dark web in the first place. He easily set up a few safeguards, such as a virtual machine and a VPN, virtual private network, on his computer to ensure his anonymity. Along with that, he tested several browsers that didn't block access to the dark web, eventually finding a suitable browser named Tor. He'd also found that cryptocurrency was commonly used for underground transactions since it was less easy to trace compared to conventional transaction methods. He ended up creating a cryptocurrency account too. Done with setting up, Izuku spent the next few days finding related websites or forums in his spare time. Unsurprisingly, scamming fools on the dark web was common practice. Many fools would fork up their money for websites that promised real assassination services in exchange for thin air. As a consequence, finding a dedicated website that was legitimately involved in bounty hunting and contract killing services became a challenge. Fortunately, it was easy for Izuku to figure out whether a website was a scam based on the way that said website advertised itself. Even though identifying the scams weren't difficult, it was still undeniably tedious to sift through loads of fake websites just to find one that didn't even pique his interest. In light of this, Izuku shifted his focus to forums and message boards, with the people that were hopefully more inclined to engage in actual business than to carry out scams. Izuku explored several of these forums and message boards, going through threads and posts until he found something that interested him. On day 4 of his medical leave, something interesting finally happened. While going through a thread on a message board for contract killing, Izuku saw a posting that caught his eye. For real? Staring at his computer screen, Izuku came upon something absurdly unexpected. The post itself was simple, asking for anyone who was interested in a job to directly message the poster's account. Its text read, "Looking for agents operating in the Mizudafu area of Shizuoka Prefecture. Anyone interested, contact me for more details." The message itself wasn't anything out of the blue. He'd already scrolled past heaps of similarly worded postings on other websites, though this was the first one that was looking for someone from Mizudafu. But what stunned him was the poster's username and profile picture. The poster's profile picture was the kanji word kong in black, lying on a white backdrop. The username was also the single word kong, followed by the kanji words for mediator Jungjija in brackets. It's Kong. Shu Kong used the exact same username and profile picture on the curse user message board that Toji once operated on. No way it's him. Could it really be? Clicking on the poster's username, Izuku entered the profile page, finding an option on the UI to send a direct message. Before he was able to send any message, however, the system wanted him to create an account first. Of course. Rolling his eyes, Izuku quickly created an account, offhandedly choosing the kanji word green as a username. Once he finished, he sent a rather straightforward message. "Lear, your full name's Shu Kong, isn't it?" Within half an hour or so of sending his message, the account's owner responded to Izuku's strange and sudden message. "Kong, Jongjieja, how the hell do you know that? Let me guess, someone placed a hit on me?" "Lear, do you know a guy named Toji?" Asking if this mysterious mediator knew who Toji would hopefully tell Izuku whether Kong from Toji's world had somehow ended up in this world of quirks too. Kong, Zhongjie. Never heard of the guy. Is it him that wants me dead? Maybe it's a different version of Kong in this world? No, it is a different version. Too big of a coincidence that I stumbled upon someone else named Shu Kong, who happens to work as a mediator and handler for assassins. Meeting and seeing what this person had to offer was the best way to confirm Izuku's assumption. Midori, Rira, Kusu. I'm not carrying out a hit on you. Only a fool would contact their target before killing them. Lear, someone I know told me about you before. I'm interested in your job opening in Mizudafu. Kong, Zhongjie. Good to know that you're not an idiot. If you really are interested in doing business, meet me at the Marichasi restaurant near Tatooine Station. 1 p.m. tomorrow. Tell the server that you're looking for Kong. I'd advise against trying anything funny. Smart move. Heroes patrol that part of the city really often. If I didn't want to kill him there, I'd be caught the moment I stepped foot out of the restaurant. Ending their conversation, Izuku felt mildly excited and intrigued for tomorrow. Izuku glanced at his phone, making sure not to bump into anyone as he followed the GPS's instructions. Soon after leaving the station, Izuku casually made his way to the restaurant, wearing a dark aquamarine hoodie with its hood up. Hopefully the hoodie would help in hiding his identity if anyone who passed by him recognized him or if he got into any sort of trouble. That restaurant should be just around here. 2 more turns and a few dozen more meters of walking later, Izuku arrived at the restaurant. A large black sign with the white words La Marichasi in fine cursive and smaller words that read restaurant in Japanese above the frontage indicated that he was in the right place. Peering in from the outside through the glass windows, Izuku could tell that the place was relatively full. He couldn't make out much detail about the interior, since the windows were darkly tinted from the outside, allowing him to only make out the silhouettes of people and the warm glow of lights. Grabbing onto the steel handle, Izuku gently pushed the glass door open. Upon opening the door, Izuku's ears were pleasantly greeted by the sound of classical music playing. The music playing in the restaurant is the elegant time track from JJK S2's OST. Izuku wasn't disappointed by the sight. Fancy place, he let out subconsciously as he laid his eyes on the place. The restaurant's design appeared to be a mix of a minimalistic and Western style, with a hint of French decor. The floor was covered by black and white tiles in a mosaic pattern, while the walls and pillars were coated in a mix of dark wood panels and mirrors. As for the ceiling, it was beige in color, supporting a few chandelier-like lamps that emitted a warm yellow light. Further adding to the luxurious aesthetic were the presence of tall leaf plants in white pots. As Izuku was taking in the restaurant's design, a server of the restaurant, a young man attired in a white dress shirt with a black tie and black vest, came to greet him, welcoming him and asking whether he had a reservation or wanted a table on the spot. I'm looking for someone named Kong, Izuku clarified. The server politely nodded. Follow me. The server motioned kindly, walking deeper into the restaurant. Izuku followed the server, walking past the restaurant's main area until he reached the entrance to a hallway that had 5 dark wooden doors on both sides. Each door was labeled with Roman numerals ranging from 1 to 10. The server pointed his hand at a door labeled 4, informing Izuku that Kong was in one of their private rooms. Izuku thanked the server, who bowed in response before returning to the reception area, leaving Izuku in front of a door labeled 4 in gold lettering. Twisting the brass doorknob, Izuku readied himself to meet Kong again, except this time he was a scrawny, 15-year-old teenager that was shorter than average instead of a monstrously bulky 20-something-year-old man who towered over most people. What he saw as he opened the door, however, briefly sent his mind haywire, leaving him wide-eyed. Even in a million years, Izuku could never expect what he saw after opening that door. Instead of being greeted by the sight of the mediator that he was so familiar with, Izuku was greeted by the sight of a lady. No way. No fucking way. The lady was in her mid to late 30s, dressed in an unbuttoned dark gray suit with a black tie and also dark gray pants. Underneath the suit was a very light, gray button-up shirt. Her figure was hourglass in shape, being decently attractive for Izuku's, Toji's, standards. But that wasn't the point. The fucking point was that she looked like the Shu Kong that Toji knew, except more feminine and pretty. Her face wasn't directly copied and pasted from Kong's face, but it resembled Kong's face enough that Izuku wouldn't hesitate to call her Kong's twin. Her hair was in the same shade of black as Kong's hair, but it flowed to her shoulders and was wavy in stark contrast. Without beating around the bush, she was virtually a female version of the Kong that Toji knew. At the moment, she was seated at a cloth-draped round table, pulling out a lone cigarette from a pack and lighting it as Izuku entered the room. "Didn't expect my new agent to be a kid," she plainly remarked, placing the orange tip of the cigarette into her mouth. "For real," Izuku muttered, taken aback by the surprise. The lady pulled the cigarette from her mouth, exhaling the pungent smoke. "What do you mean by for real?" she questioned, slightly annoyed by Izuku's odd response. Recovering from his initial shock, Izuku managed to stutter out a reply. "Why your Shu Kong?" he exclaimed, still in disbelief. "I thought that you knew who I was already, yet you're surprised?" But you're a woman. Shu is a guy's name," Izuku claimed, attempting to defend his reaction. Raising an eyebrow, she explained, Siwoo, or Shu in Japanese, is a unisex Korean name. It's mostly a name for men, but women can have it too, you know. Now are you here to gawk over the fact that I'm a woman, or are you here for a job? She added before taking another puff of her cigarette in exasperation. Still bewildered, but regaining his composure, Izuku took a seat opposite to Kong, lowering his hood and more clearly revealing his younger appearance. He could still hear the classical music faintly playing through the wall. "You really are a kid. How old are you? 12? 13? She teased, smoke trailing from her mouth. Izuku felt faintly offended by the question. "I'm 15. Tell you what, kid, this isn't a game. You don't know what you're getting yourself into. I know you're thinking that this is going to be fun, but this isn't like in the movies or video games. Don't call me when you're laying on the ground in a pool of your own blood, crying for me to save you. 'Cause I won't. Go back home now while you still can before you really regret this," she warned, shifting to a more serious tone. Hearing this, Izuku couldn't help but smile lazily. "I may not look like it, but believe me when I say I have plenty of experience in this line of work," he confessed. As crazy as it sounded, it wasn't a lie on Izuku's part. Kong placed the cigarette into her mouth once again, staring intently at Izuku. She was psychoanalyzing Izuku, using her experience as a former detective in an attempt to discern his behavior. This kid's insane. She expected to find an overconfident kid who was lying on the spot. Perhaps someone who showed signs of delusion. Instead, she was met with something more intriguing. Upon focusing on him, she realized that the kid's emerald eyes had a cold-blooded glow. His face was certainly that of a baby-faced teenager, but his eyes told a different story, as if they'd seen far too much violence and death impossible in his lifetime. He oozed an aura that most killers possessed, a smell familiar to Kong. But she wasn't intimidated. She'd met people who exuded a similar aura like the kid at least 100 times throughout her career. She was more interested by the fact that he was the youngest person she'd ever met involved in her line of work. Remaining skeptical, she let out a puff of smoke and questioned Izuku further. "How do I know that you're not lying? A kid like you can't possibly have that much experience in assassinations." Izuku subtly bragged, "Give me whatever job you have, then you'll have your proof." "If you say so. But I warned you. Don't expect me to save you if things go to hell," she conceded. If the kid had a death wish, she wasn't exactly obliged to stop it. Done with that conversation, Kong decided to start on a different subject. "Anyways, tell me your name, so I can call you that instead of kid," she began. Izuku contemplated for a few seconds on whether to reveal his real name, ultimately deciding not to, as revealing his real name could cause issues down the line. "Call me Fushiguro," he lied. "Is it really lying to use your own name from a different lifetime?" Is that your real name or an alias? In a playful manner, he replied, depends on what you think. So an alias it is. Smart that you're not using your real name for this kind of work, Kong complimented. Then why do you use your real name? Izuku pointed out. She elaborated, my clients only know me as Kong. No one in this line of work knows my full name, except for you somehow. Pausing for a while, Kong pressed the cigarette but into an ashtray, extinguishing it. Enough chit-chat. The job's dash. Wait. I don't take jobs targeting innocents. Only criminals and villains, Izuku mentioned, making his stance clear. A contract killer with morals, huh? You don't see that often. Izuku couldn't tell whether that was meant as a compliment or an insult. Comme procéded. Well, you're in luck, Fushiguro. Tell me, have you heard of the Kyoku Rising Sun Alliance? What's that? He asked. It's an umbrella group uniting over 100 smaller Yakuza groups in Japan. The second largest Yakuza confederation in Japan with over 5,000 members, if I recall correctly. As expected from a name, the alliance idealizes imperial Japanese beliefs and values to combat the modern ills of Japan, mixed in with some quirk supremacy. In essence, they're right-wing extremists. They aren't particularly favored by many due to their values, but they held a lot of power in the underworld. Wouldn't such a group already be dealt with by heroes? From what I know, the Yakuza are on their last legs, Izuku queried, curious on how such a large criminal organization could still exist in an era where heroes like All Might were so prevalent. Letting out a chuckle, Kong debunked the claim, as if she read his thoughts. All Might is good, but he can't be everywhere in Japan at once. You'd be surprised at how well the Yakuza hides itself these days. They're ghosts compared to their glory days, but they're nowhere as extinct as what the media wants you to believe. Recently, the entire alliance crumbled, likely due to some infighting between their higher-ups, if the rumors are true. All the gangs that were a part of it splintered off. As a result, people from both the Kyoku Alliance itself and other alliances are taking the opportunity to deal with people they want dead. That's not all. For some reason, a fair number of said gangs have flocked to Mizuta-fu, even though that's where the top 2 heroes in the nation live, she added. Why so? Hell if I know. That's none of my business. My job is to be a mediator and smoothing things out, she admitted. How much is the pay for this job that you're offering me? 1 million yen. Izuku almost opened his mouth to protest. The amount was chump change compared to what Toji normally earned per job. But considering that he was just starting out in this business, he couldn't be too picky about the jobs he received. We'll start with something small. If you're as good as you claim to be, I'll give you some better paying jobs to do. She clarified, that is if you decide to continue working with me, of course. Fine, he accepted. Perfect. Now to finally talk about the job. The job is to deal with Kazuhiko Kitamura. He was in charge of one of several trafficking rings within the Kyoku Alliance. As for what kind, either sex or quirk trafficking according to our client. Our client has requested for his name to be kept secret, so we'll keep it at that. Moving on, our client has a grudge against Kazuhiko. He's wanted the man dead for a long time, but didn't do anything out of fear of retaliation from the Alliance. Since that's no longer the case, he's acting now. Kong handed her phone to Izuku. The phone displayed a photo of Kazuhiko, who was a younger man, possibly in his mid-20s with a somewhat boyish face. His hair was choppy and medium length, light beige in color. Notably, he had pale skin and red eyes. But what really stood out about him was the red streak along the right side of his hair. In the photo, Kazuhiko appeared to be at a nightclub, wearing a red dress shirt. His face was cheerful and relaxed, maybe even kind if Izuku wanted to generously describe him. If Izuku didn't know about Kazuhiko's background, he would have thought that his job was to kill a random salaryman who had hair that stood out. Handing the phone back to Kong, she continued providing information. His quirk is called Wind Force. He can generate winds that are strong enough to push someone or knock them to the ground, but it's not anything special. He should be easy enough to deal with. After the alliance collapsed, he and his little group moved to Mizudafu just a few days ago to set up a new ring. Like most villains and criminals, he set up shop at a small abandoned storage facility located in the deeper and older parts of Mizudafu's industrial district. Tomorrow night, he's going to meet our client to discuss business. Our client wants him ambushed and killed after they've finished their discussion at any time as long as it's within the same night. Also, get yourself a burner phone. I'll keep in contact with you and send the facility's address through that, she abruptly added. With that, she concluded her explanation. That's all I can tell you about. Anything else you want to ask? Yeah. Unexpectedly, Izuku's tone shifted, tinged with a hidden sheepishness that Kong managed to detect. I don't have a weapon. I need your help to get me one. Seriously? Izuku finished his incapacitation of the last member present, causing the man to collapse into the ground with a stab to the shoulder. As the man fell, a few words spilled out of the man's mouth in between gasps of pain. What are you? Izuku simply stated, just a guy doing a job. He was dressed in an all-black outfit consisting of a dark windbreaker, black jeans, and sneakers. A black cap hid his green hair. The hood of his windbreaker was also up, further covering a portion of his head. Further hiding his identity was a black face mask obscuring the lower half of his visage. Only the upper part of his face and cold eyes were visible. In his black-gloved right hand was a katana, soaked in the blood of Kazuhiko's men. The blade was tilted downwards, causing drops of crimson to drip onto the ground slowly but profusely. He spent most of his morning shopping for clothes, trying to find pieces of clothing that were cheap but had decent enough quality to last him a few jobs. In Izuku's opinion, the outfit he wore was much too edgy for his tastes. In fact, would even go as far to say that he actively disliked it. He wanted something less restrictive that didn't make him look like a cosplayer. Lesser clothes also meant that there was a lesser chance for any residuals to be left behind. On short notice, however, the edgy outfit was the best disguise that he could put together. When Toji carried out his jobs, he never bothered to hide his identity at all. The sorcerers didn't actively hunt malicious people in the jujitsu community, such as curse users, enabling them to operate freely as long as they acted in secret and refrained from involving non-sorcerers too much. Of course, operating freely also meant not attracting the ire of Satoru Gojo. But Izuku couldn't take that kind of risk. Heroes patrolled every part of the city, even the more deserted areas. There was a chance that some hero would come into the storage facility if they saw or heard something strange. If that happened, he needed to escape as soon as possible. Not wearing any disguises would allow a hero to identify and expose him. If he was caught, he was absolutely fucked, considering that he'd be labeled as a villain and be hunted relentlessly. Besides patrolling heroes, surveillance devices were also a problem. Surveillance devices were something of little concern during Toji's stint as an assassin, since the tech for devices like security cameras wasn't as commonplace, and an assassin like him was skilled enough to stay out of a security camera's sight. Jiu-jitsu-associated areas where he mostly operated and also barely had anything as advanced as security cameras. But in Quark society, where technology was much more advanced, surveillance devices were everywhere. The danger of missing one camera and slipping up was far more likely with how many camera networks there were in public. Even a few seconds of footage with his face exposed could be enough to link him back to a crime. As for his katana, it was of acceptable quality. It was nowhere comparable to the quality of the Zenin clan's weaponry, but it would suffice for now. Kong bought him the katana. He received the katana from her when they met just before he headed for the storage facility. But there was a catch. To pay for the katana, Kong ended up docking 800,000 yen from Izuku's base pay. He begrudgingly accepted it, though he had a feeling that she pocketed a couple thousand yen for herself to round off the numbers. Paying for the katana, his outfit, and a burner phone left Izuku with a measly 113,000 yen or so as his actual pay for the job. This job had better be worth it. Hopefully, Kazuhiko wouldn't take too long to return to the facility. As an excuse to return home late at night, Izuku told his mom that he was going to queue for the release of some limited edition All Might merch, and that it was probably going to take 2 to 3 hours for his turn to buy it. Awaiting Kazuhiko's arrival, Izuku wiped the blood off his blade with 2 gloved fingers. Once the katana was clean enough, he slid it into the sheath on his left hip, producing a soft chink that echoed in the foyer. Soon enough, Kazuhiko returned. Kazuhiko approached the entrance of the storage facility. His mind was floating on the satisfactory meeting he just had, having sealed a beneficial deal involving his trafficking business. When he stepped foot into the main foyer, Kazuhiko came upon a gruesome scene. On the concrete floor lay his men. All 16 of them were seemingly dead, strewn around the main foyer of the mostly empty storage facility. Their bodies were covered in brutal but precise cuts. Small pools of blood pooled around their injuries. Stumbling into the main foyer, Kazuhiko struggled to process the sight. What is this?" said Kazuhiko, horrified. Hearing a thud to the right of him, Kazuhiko snapped his head. He saw someone taking small steps towards him, walking past scattered rubbish and remains within the main foyer. Based on where this person was walking from, Kazuhiko could tell that the person had jumped down from a 2-story tall viewing platform in the facility, producing the loud thud that he just heard. The platform provided a wide view of the main foyer, allowing this shadowy person to monitor Kazuhiko's arrival. But what really disturbed Kazuhiko was how silent this person was. There was no noise with each step they took, as if there was no one present in the first place. Somehow, Kazuhiko knew that whoever this was had intentionally landed with a loud thud to alert him. Once this person was closer, but still a distance away, Kazuhiko was able to make out that this person was dressed black from head to toe, hiding their identity. The person's viridian eyes locked with his, almost looking amused. You did this. You killed my men," he slowly said, stricken with a mix of rage and unease. "I didn't cut any of them deep enough to kill. Don't worry, I'm only here for you after all," Izuku taunted. "Who sent you? Hayato? Tsubasa? All I know is that I'm here to deal with you. I could have hid and killed you from the back, but I'll give you a chance to put up a fight." Kazuhiko cursed at Izuku. "Damn you." Stepping back, a syringe filled with red liquid appeared in Kazuhiko's hand. He jabbed the needle into his neck, causing him to yell out in pain. "Grapha." Dropping the syringe, Kazuhiko seized on the spot for a few seconds before he recovered. "You're dead," he called out, sounding more agitated and guttural than before. Lashing his arm out in Izuku's direction, Kazuhiko sent a blast of wind in Izuku's direction. The wind was extremely violent and intense in nature, having been amplified by the drug that Kazuhiko had injected himself with. Izuku sensed the changes in air pressure, easily dodging it with a rapid leap into the air before the blast of wind could hit him. He landed on a pile of crates that were some space behind Kazuhiko with a loud thud. Both his legs were bent and an arm were placed on the wooden surface, allowing him to balance his landing. Rising up, he questioned, "That's Trigger, isn't it?" impressed by Kazuhiko's power. "Now this is getting fun." "You talk too much," growled Kazuhiko, madly sending another burst of wind towards Izuku's direction. Based on the changes in air pressure, Izuku noticed that the attack was different than the previous one, as the wind wasn't spread out in a large area like a blast, but was instead concentrated into a slash. With a sharp dodge, Izuku shifted his body to the left, causing the large slash of wind to miss his body by centimeters. The slash of wind hit the wall behind him, producing a loud boom as it impacted. Izuku looked behind, where a large slanted cut scarred the wall, spanning a few meters. It caught Izuku's attention for a brief moment. Kazuhiko was flabbergasted. "You dodged it. How?" Steadily unsheathing his katana, Izuku redirected his attention to Kazuhiko, jumping down the crates and rushing towards him with katana in hand. Seeing the beast dressed in black charging towards him, Kazuhiko sent a flurry of wind slashes at Izuku's direction in hopes of landing one that would be fatal. Izuku weaved through each slash maniacally with precision, lost in the thrill of the moment. He finally felt alive like Toji did. Underneath the mask, his expression was crazed. As Izuku neared, Kazuhiko prepared to send a blast of wind to create some distance between the two of them in favor of himself. Anticipating that Kazuhiko would try some sort of trick, Izuku rushed past Kazuhiko, circling to his back instead. Gripping his katana with both hands, Izuku angled his katana to strike Kazuhiko's back, attempting a heavy horizontal slash that would have bisected or cleaved clean through Kazuhiko's torso if it landed. In a stroke of luck, Kazuhiko managed to react in time before the blade came into contact with his flesh. He swatted his hand behind and unleashed a blast of wind. Unfortunately, the blast of wind was aimed straight at where Izuku's face was, forcing him to directly tank the brunt of the blast. The wind blast sent Izuku flying into the air. He smashed into a concrete pillar, shattering it before tumbling onto the ground. Recovering from the ground, Izuku quickly felt for any injuries and expectedly found none. His wind's powerful, but it's a disappointment compared to the strength of the Limitless Techniques Reversal Red, less than nothing even. It's only that strong because he took a dose of Trigger too. I can wait for the trigger to wear off and attack him then. But where's the fun in that? He also noticed that his face mask and cap had been blown away, revealing his teenage face and mop of green hair. In the heat of the moment, however, he wasn't concerned with that. Either way, Kazuhiko wasn't going to leave this place alive tonight. With a single dash, he returned back to face Kazuhiko. He expected Kazuhiko to mention something about his appearance, but it seemed that Kazuhiko was too enraged and high off trigger to comment on anything. With an arrogant smile, Izuku cautioned, "I'm going to speed things up, try to keep up," giving Kazuhiko a heads up. As Izuku finished that sentence, he disappeared from Kazuhiko's line of sight, moving with immense speed. Trying to see where Izuku had disappeared to, Kazuhiko found that Izuku was speeding around the foyer like a bullet. The sound of Izuku's leaps repeated like gunshots, followed by whizzing noises from Izuku's speed that reverberated throughout the foyer, as if bullets from a machine gun were whizzing from all directions. Overwhelmed, he quickly looked around in all directions, trying to track Izuku's movements to no avail. Whenever he tried to see where Izuku was already gone, having already moved to one or two new positions. Shit, he's too fast. I can't follow him. I need to. KRSSHD. Before Kazuhiko could finish that line of thought, he heard the sound of a blade going through flesh and the splattering of liquid onto the ground. Looking down, he saw a long blade protruding from the right side of his chest, covered in blood with the sharp edge facing upwards. QJJKS2 OSD track, Toji Fushiguro. Izuku impaled Kazuhiko from the back, his right hand gripping the katana's handle while his left palm was on the pommel. The katana had pierced Kazuhiko's right lung, causing him to cough up blood in horror. His mouth quickly filled with a coppery taste. Izuku repositioned both his hands to hold onto the katana's handle. Seething with frenzy, he pushed the katana upwards in a single motion, causing blood to spill into the air. The blade sliced through the right side of Kazuhiko's chest and shoulder like a hot knife through butter, creating a clean gap of severed muscles and flesh. As Kazuhiko turned to face Izuku in shock, he received a horizontal slash aimed at his gut, followed by a diagonal cut that extended from his left bicep to his torso. Both of the slashes happened so intensely and swiftly that blood burst out of Kazuhiko's torso in the shape of a cross. As a finisher, Izuku delivered a push kick to Kazuhiko's midsection, sending him falling backwards to the ground. Unable to scream in agony due to the blood that filled his throat, only gargling noises came from Kazuhiko's mouth. The last thing he saw before the end was his assassin standing over him, face marred with a cut-shaped scar on the corner of the right lip. A glint of bloodlust tinted his assassin's emerald eyes. "I'll remember you." Seconds later, the glow of life in his red eyes faded. Finally done, Izuku took a deep breath, taking in his work. Shit, I should have aimed straight for his heart. Less of a mess that way, he realized, rubbing away some of Kazuhiko's blood that was on his face. Izuku went around the foyer to collect his mask and cap before returning to Kazuhiko's corpse. Looking around, Kazuhiko's men remained on the ground, heavily maimed by Izuku's initial assault and still reeling from their wounds. Did I really cut them that bad? Hopefully none of them died. He wasn't paid to kill them, so he didn't see any necessity for them to die. Yet, though he might have left some of them crippled for life. For a moment, he planned to find a nearby public phone to call the police to have aid sent to the storage facility, but decided against it. His battle in the foyer surely caused some commotion. It was likely that someone from a nearby building had already called for police or a hero to check on the place. If so, he needed to leave fast. Before leaving, he needed to take care of one last thing. Going through his jacket, Izuku pulled out his burner phone with his left hand and snapped a photo of Kazuhiko's mutilated body, sending it to Kong as proof of a job completed. After sending the picture, he dialed Kong's number. Kong was at a restaurant meeting with a potential client when she received Izuku's message and call. Excusing herself, she went outside of the restaurant to answer the call, taking the opportunity for a smoke break as well. "It's done," he bluntly informed. "Looks like you weren't lying, though you were more messy than I expected." "Good job, Fushiguro," she praised, grabbing the cigarette pack out of her pocket at the same time. Izuku reminded, "Remember to get that money ready for me, by the way." "Yeah, I'll have it deposited in your account by tomorrow. Also, you dash." Before Kong could ask Izuku whether he still wanted to work with her, he'd already hung up. Kong glared at her phone, sighing. "Bastard," she grumbled. Pouting, she flicked a cigarette out of the pack in her hand, preparing to light it. She was a little pissed, but what happened wasn't something to get too mad about. If she offered another job to him, and he accepted, it was a sign that he'd want to continue doing business with her. Despite the slight, she had a feeling that working with Fushiguro was going to be worthwhile. Once Izuku, accidentally, ended his call with Kong early, he shoved the phone back into his jacket. He flicked his katana towards the ground, allowing Kazuhiko's blood to slide off the blade and removing the crimson layer. A fiendish grin that stretched from ear to ear formed on Izuku's face. "I'm getting my edge back," he murmured. Sheathing his katana, Izuku turned away from the corpse, leaving the scene. Nearing the uniformed police officers, Nagai flashed his gold badge, granting him permission to step over the yellow police tape. "Just my luck that I'm on duty today." Exhaling deeply through his nose, Nagai knew that what he was seeing was going to be a messy case, even without context. "It's been what? 2 years since I've had an easy case." At the moment, he was looking at the aftermath of what appeared to be a rather violent fight. Heavily injured men covered in blood and what appeared to be long cuts were scattered around the foyer, being tended to by EMTs. And so the streak continues. Ambulance sirens wailed loudly from the entrance behind him, fading as he made his way deeper into the foyer. Based on the amount of blood that pooled around where the injured men laid, he wouldn't be surprised if a few of the men had already bled out. Miraculously, it seemed that all 16 men that he counted lying in the foyer had a minimum of 1 EMT around them, indicating that they were all still alive. Except for one person. He wasn't close enough to determine what kind of injuries the person had sustained. But considering that none of the white-helmeted EMTs bothered checking on them, Nagai felt that it was safe to say that whoever laid there painted in crimson was very much dead. Based on his initial observations, he quickly assumed that what he was seeing was potentially the outcome of some gang violence. A quick glimpse of his surroundings indicated that some kind of fight had occurred. There was noticeable damage to the area, such as a long and deep cut on the wall that was likely made by someone with a powerful cutting quirk. The men who were found also didn't really dress or look like civilians. Yet they didn't dress with the flair most independent villains did. Adding on the fact that there was uniformity among their outfits, it was plausible that they were part of some group, likely a gang. That's unexpected. Last I knew of, almost all of the local gangs were stamped out by heroes not long ago. Of course, he would need to get more information for a clearer image before he could come to any real conclusions. Incidents like these were always never that simple. And once it becomes clear that things aren't so simple, they'll set up a task force, and I'll be asked to head it by virtue of my achievements. It was a pattern ever since he was promoted. Gotta need a break. Other than the EMTs, roughly a dozen police officers were present on the scene. Some of the officers were securing the scene, cordoning off key areas with yellow tape. Others were photographing anything of note in the vicinity. No doubt that there were also more officers going through the rest of the storage facility. Passing by each officer, Nagai inspected their insignias before finding the field sergeant who was responsible for managing the officers present. The sergeant was in his 40s, probably around 10 years younger than Nagai himself. Nagai could tell that the sergeant was a by-the-rulebook type of guy, possessing a broad and stern face with neatly combed brown hair. From Nagai's experience, people like that were either pleasantly blunt or had to stick up their ass. Straightening his ink-colored necktie, Nagai approached the sergeant, who was currently relaying orders to a lower-ranking police officer. Taking notice of Nagai's approach, the sergeant quickly wrapped up the conversation with his subordinate before turning to face the detective. "You are Dash. Detective Inspector Nagai, Mizudafu Central Police Department. I'm from the Violent Crimes Unit, assigned to this case," Nagai introduced, flashing the detective tag that hung around his neck in a lanyard while simultaneously pulling out his police badge. "And you're Sergeant Dash?" "Sergeant Nakamura, Kaihoko Precinct." Thankfully, it appeared that Nakamura was the former. "Give me a rundown, Sergeant," Nagai requested, shoving his badge back into his jacket. Taking a deep breath, Nakamura began a lengthy explanation. "We received a noise complaint from someone who lives nearby from the storage facility. 2 of the officers under my unit who were patrolling together were dispatched to investigate. When they arrived and saw the scene, they radioed in for backup and EMTs, reporting a potential mass homicide or mass attack incident caused by villains. I had the rest of my units sent here along with some help from other nearby stations. The EMTs arrived at the same time as we did, which was roughly 20 minutes ago. As you can tell, we're still focused on securing the area. After a preliminary search, we found 17 people, 16 injured and 1 deceased, all found in this foyer. More than half of them are in critical condition. The remaining ones are stable, but they're not in good shape either. We tried asking anyone conscious about what happened, but no one was able to give a coherent response. From the looks of it, some kind of fight broke out, based on the noise complaint claiming to hear violent winds within the building and this bloodbath around us. As for who these people are, evidence points to them being part of a quirk trafficking ring. We've discovered notes discussing their operations, mainly plans on who to kidnap, potential targets, daily schedules of targets, and trafficking routes," he listed, face scrunching in disgust. "We also found some equipment for restraining people. Things like quirk-suppressing cuffs, cages, and sedatives. Hell, we even found shock collars. Fortunately, we didn't find any victims. Seems like they were still in the middle of setting up their operations," Nakamura hastily added. Underneath his professional exterior, Nagai grit his teeth. Bastards like these were absolute scum, kidnapping kids and grooming them to be exploited and sold, along with capturing women to be used like breeding stock. Throughout his 37 years of service in the police force, Nagai could count the trafficking cases he'd investigated on one hand. Even so, the cases made him feel tremendously infuriated with how horrific they were. Having met with victims of quirk trafficking before, he knew firsthand about the effects of this heinous practice. Many victims were left mentally broken, suffering from all kinds of mental trauma that would never heal, seemingly damaging the soul itself. Is there any indication on how long they've been here? Nagai asked, concerned about how long these monsters were left unchecked. Based on some documents we found, it seems like they moved from Shinjuku about a week ago. That's concerning. Could all of this be connected to some larger operation? Nagai frowned. Any mention of why they decided to move? Unfortunately, no. Anything else of note? For now, that's all I know. Chances are, there's still more info and evidence to be found. My men aren't finished combing through the entire facility yet, Nakamura explained. Has the forensics team arrived? They're en route, said Nakamura, eyes quickly pointing at the black-strapped analog watch on his wrist. Probably arriving in a few minutes. Subconsciously brushing his gray hair, Nagai thanked Nakamura. Thank you for the rundown, Sergeant Nakamura. In return, the edges of Nakamura's mouth curved slightly. My pleasure, Detective. Looking at Nakamura's face, Nagai wasn't entirely sure if what he saw could be deemed a smile. Rundown completed, Nakamura turned away from Nagai, calling over another officer for a situation report. Nagai turned away in tandem, making his way towards the lone corpse in the facility and further analyzing his surroundings in the process. He found an officer, a youthful woman with dark hair and a ponytail, taking photos of the body, trying to get every minute detail on camera. Police officers were specifically not allowed to touch corpses out of fear of tampering with evidence. Only the forensics team and veteran detectives with the right credentials, such as Nagai, could. As such, their current priorities were to ensure that whatever evidence found was properly recorded. Tapping the officer on the shoulder, Nagai politely ordered her to pause her little photography session so that he could inspect the body. Upon laying eyes on his tag, she stepped aside, allowing him to crouch down for a closer look of the corpse. The body was definitely an outlier in terms of gore he'd seen on corpses. The amount of blood that was splattered around the corpse was almost comical, like something out of a horror film with too much budget for its own good. Brutal as it was, he was mostly desensitized to the sight before him. Most police officers were, but some of the rookies might have felt nauseous or even thrown up if it was their first time laying eyes upon such a sight. This would make good material if the higher-ups decided to update that video we use for desensitization training. Ignoring the almost dried blood that overflowed from the dead man's mouth, whoever responsible for what happened had left the face mostly intact, much to Nagai's luck. At least it'll be easier to identify who this was. The dull red pupils of the victim were dilated, obviously in well-deserved fear and pain from whatever that happened before death, assuming that the dead man was also a trafficker. Nagai shifted his focus to the rest of the body, trying to identify the injuries masked by the mess of red. 3 deep slashes, including one that split open the space between his neck and shoulder, likely made by some sort of edged weapon. To a bystander's inexperienced eye, the cuts almost seemed to be made by a madman. With how violent and scattered the wounds were, Nagai couldn't blame them. The copious amount of blood definitely added to that sentiment. An experienced detective, however, especially a veteran of the Violent Crimes Unit, could tell that it was the opposite case. Sparing a quick but more analytical look at the injured traffickers closest to where he kneeled, Nagai compared their wounds, seeking confirmation about his idea that the bloodbath was the work of a single person. The width of the cuts matched up, implying the possibility that the same weapon was used to do the deed. The style of the cuts sort of matched up too. Clean, precise, and no signs of drag. No random thug could have done this. The killer's well-trained, possibly with years of experience. Whoever that dealt with the traffickers was no different than a 5-star chef gutting a chunk of raw salmon. The only sure difference was that unlike the shallower but still brutal cuts on the rest of the traffickers, the cuts on the beige-haired man were clearly aimed to kill. An assassination. That makes sense. Whoever that was in the way got cut down, but wasn't finished off. In his mind, Nagai quickly cycled through a list of known villains that had the quirks or skills to pull off such a feat of butchery. It was more likely that a villain was responsible than a vigilante. Most vigilantes, while operating outside the law, weren't this violent. He narrowed down a few suspects, but the fact that the perpetrators spared all the traffickers except for one threw a wrench in Nagai's guesswork. Almost anyone he could think of with the right skill set or quirk was locked in Tartarus already. The crime also didn't fit the modus operandi of the remaining villains he had in mind. Any of them who could brutalize the traffickers in such a fashion likely wouldn't have bothered with sparing the remainder. Only one villain stood out, but even then the idea was standing on half a leg at best. Could it be Stain? The injuries inflicted on the traffickers resembled Stain's handiwork, based on the photos of Stain's victims that Nagai had seen. A villain like Stain was also deadly enough to triumph against 17 average men in a fight. Unlikely. The crime doesn't fit Stain's modus operandi at all. Heroes have always been his target. Plus, he has never attacked a group of people like this before. Even if he did, it's more than likely for him to kill all of them instead of sparing anyone. Possibly, it was someone new, someone unseen before. Even more concerning. Finished with cycling through his suspects, Nagai ordered the young officer to retrieve a few evidence bags as he slipped on a pair of black latex gloves, deciding to conduct a more physical inspection of the corpse. Sticking his hands into the dead man's pants pockets, he found the dead man's smartphone and an ordinary brown wallet along with a small mix of 500 yen and 100 yen coins. Nagai fumbled through the wallet, discovering a hefty sum of money notes, a random assortment of credit cards and membership cards before finding the dead man's ID card. Kazuhiko Kitamura, born 22XX. That makes him 27, Nagai noted to himself. In contrast with Kazuhiko's current appearance that was locked in fear and agony, Kazuhiko's photo on the ID was charming, innocent-looking and almost naive, hiding the monster beneath. Never judge a book by its cover, as the saying goes. Next, he turned on the smartphone, only to expectedly find that it was password protected. Grabbing an evidence bag from the young officer who had just returned, Nagai placed the wallet, phone, and coins into separate bags before checking the dead man's shirt pocket. Upon reaching into the shirt pocket, he found a neatly folded piece of paper. He slowly unfolded the piece of paper, careful to avoid making any accidental creases. On the piece of paper was a phone number, written in dark blue ink. I'll need to cross-check this number with the phone's call history once I get it unlocked. Big chance of it being a lead. Hopefully I can trace the number to somewhere important. Just as Nagai placed the piece of paper into a bag, he noticed that the forensics team had arrived, catching a glimpse of the team through the facility's main entrance. Currently, most of the team was unloading their gear from police vans, while a few members were suiting up in their hazmat-like forensics outfits. Now, it was time for him to wait for the forensics team to do their job. Not specializing in forensics and lacking special equipment could only allow him to do so much. In the meantime, he needed to compose his thoughts and relay whatever he discovered to the higher-ups. If the forensics team failed to find any indication of the killer's identity, it meant that things are going to get a lot more messy, since a hero couldn't be pointed in the right direction to deal with the issue. With a few exceptions like Eraserhead, a majority of heroes didn't even have the faintest idea on how to chase ghosts. That's why people like Nagai still existed in an age dominated by flashy, costumed heroes. As for interrogation of the traffickers, he had a detective in mind that could help. The guy generally liaised with heroes, but was more than willing to lend his help to other departments as long as he had the time for it. Guy's a lot more generous than I am, that's for sure. Sliding his smartphone out of his jacket, Nagai scrolled through his contacts before finding, then dialing the number he needed. I need to call in a favor, Tsukachi, said Nagai to the detective on the other line. The moment Katsuki first received the news from his parents that Deku had been involved in some kind of accident, his mind blanked. Somehow, he knew what happened. No, that nerd. They told him that they'd received news that Izuku had fallen from Aldera's rooftop and was in extremely critical condition, unlikely to survive past the day. He grasped at every straw, trying to rationalize what had happened. His parents understood that he was greatly distressed by the sudden news. It wasn't unreasonable considering that from their point of view, both Katsuki and Izuku were friends since the ripe age of 3. It was natural to be distressed out of concern for a friend, they believed, but they didn't know what exactly happened that caused such distress for Katsuki. Deku jumped himself. I didn't force him. Those were just words. He'd probably have jumped even if I didn't say that. There was no denying it. He was the one who planted that seed of thought in the first place. I did this. Despair and regret permeated every fiber of his being. Oh God, what have I done? Why did I say that? He was going to be responsible for someone's death. The police would find out that he was responsible. No way did Deku not leave some kind of message or note explaining what led to that point. The point of taking your own life. And the highlight of the note would be Katsuki Bakugo. Either way, his prospects of becoming a pro hero, no, his future in general was effectively gone. Katsuki didn't know what he was supposed to do. In a way, he submitted to whatever fate that was about to befall him in the coming days. A day after news of Izuku's accident had reached him, he and his parents visited Annie Inko at the hospital where Izuku was hospitalized at. Miraculously, Izuku was still alive. That was the first and last time he'd visited Izuku at the hospital. He couldn't bear the shame of visiting someone who he bullied to attempting suicide. Katsuki didn't have to attend school that day, since Aldera was closed for the police to investigate. Entering Izuku's hospital room, they were met by Inko, whose eyes were puffy and swollen from hours of crying her eyes out. Dark bags also rested under her eyes, indicating that she hadn't slept at all in the past day. He's in a coma. The doctors, they don't know when he'll wake up. They say even if he does, he'll be a vegetable. Oh God, this is all my fault, informed Inko before breaking into a fit of tears, overtaken by extreme sorrow. While his parents comforted Annie Inko, he could only lay his eyes on Izuku. Izuku's body laid on the blue hospital bed, almost fully wrapped in a layer of bandages. Casts encased 3 of his 4 limbs, while his green hair was hidden under the wrappings of bandages. A ventilator was attached to his mouth, seemingly complemented by several other wires that were attached to the other parts of his body. Under said ventilator was a medical patch that covered the right corner of his mouth. Looking at Izuku's broken form, it was understandable to assume that he wouldn't survive for long, bearing in mind the fact that he was quirkless. While visiting Annie Inko, they'd received confirmation that Izuku had indeed attempted suicide. She informed them that the police had found evidence that pointed to Izuku attempting suicide, telling them about the discovery that Izuku had removed his shoes before falling and the discovery of the suicide note. She'd also given a rough summary of how badly Izuku was injured, adding to Katsuki's shame with each injury she listed. Inko had relayed to them all this while bawling her eyes out in front of them, mixed in with hitched sobs of her blaming herself for what happened, followed by his parents providing reassurances that it wasn't her fault and that it was nobody's fault. It was my fault. Hearing her so distraught, Katsuki believed that he was done for. He braced himself for Auntie Inko to have a change in tone, to reveal and pour her rage and grief onto him, exposing his sins for all to hear. But that didn't happen. He went home as if he wasn't complicit. There was no police waiting for him. They'll find out soon enough. It's only a matter of time. He waited over the span of a few days, but nothing happened. When nothing came to pass, he debated on turning himself in. At the end of it, he didn't do it, guilty as he was. Whether it was out of fear, shame, some twisted sense of pride, or because he really didn't care enough. He didn't know. Returning to school after the police investigation was over, Katsuki discovered that Aldera's reputation and status was unexpectedly none the worse for wear. Since there was no concrete proof of what led Izuku's suicide attempt, Aldera managed to hush up the entire incident. Apparently, Izuku's suicide note was worded vaguely enough to not implicate anyone's involvement, instead containing more about his hopelessness and self-loathing. As a result, it was easy enough for Aldera to claim in an official statement that Izuku was suffering from a pre-existing mental condition that had led to his attempt, and that Aldera bore no responsibility in the first place, since no one could have predicted whatever that happened. Some parents questioned why it was possible for a student to access the school's roof, particularly after schooling hours. The school's board responded by shifting blame onto the school's janitor for carelessly leaving the door unlocked, causing the poor man to be swiftly fired. Katsuki didn't care or know whether that was true. The days after the incident had been a blur to him. It was a struggle to think straight or act normal. His body was functionally on autopilot, leading him to be far less lifeless than his usual brash and abrasive self. He didn't even have the focus to train properly. The change didn't go unnoticed. His parents could tell that he was depressed from seeing his friend so horribly injured, from their perspective at least. Even someone like him would be shaken to the core. They assumed that he needed time to grieve and recover from the news. His lackeys and classmates, too, could tell that something was up. But they didn't dare ask the explosive blonde why, out of fear of being on the same end of what Deku once received. At the end of the day, a bomb was still a bomb, even if it didn't want to explode. The school's teachers were no better. Under the school board's command, teachers were ordered to ensure that the news surrounding Izuku died down. Thus, they strayed from acknowledging anything about Izuku beyond the official statement, including Katsuki's change in attitude. Most of them were aware of Izuku and Katsuki's friendship, if it could even be called that. It didn't take a genius to figure out that Katsuki's current state was connected to Izuku's suicide attempt. Things continued in such a state until Izuku returned to school unannounced. There was no sign or warning to prepare Katsuki beforehand. Just seconds before class started for the day, Izuku waltzed right into the classroom like he wasn't on death's door less than 3 weeks before. Katsuki was startled. It was like seeing a ghost who had returned to haunt him. He had no clue why, but his breath was suddenly rapid, accompanied by a numbness that spread throughout his body. His classmates and teacher were equally startled. Everyone fell silent as Izuku stepped foot into the classroom. Their teacher tried giving some welcoming words, but Izuku kept quiet, barely acknowledging anyone's presence besides casting a deadpan expression as he made his way to his seat. As class began, Katsuki's initial shock gradually lessened, replaced by questions instead. How is it possible that he's back? He shouldn't be able to recover that damn fast. If Annie Inko wasn't exaggerating about the severity of Izuku's injuries, it was impossible for a quirkless person to recover from those kinds of injuries in such a short span of time, even with the power of a healing quirk like Recovery Girls. He wasn't aware of anyone in Japan who had a healing quirk strong enough to do so. Then he arrived at the only logical conclusion that he could think of. He has a quirk. That's the only way to explain how he recovered so fast. It was the only explanation that made sense. According to science, people with strong quirks tended to have bodies that adapted to house the power of said quirks, resulting in enhanced physicality and an increased efficiency of biological functions. It explained how some people with powerful quirks were more durable or able to withstand damage that would have killed people with weaker quirks and quirkless people, despite said quirks not being related to any physical traits in the first place. That means he was hiding it from me. Then those questions transformed into bubbling rage. He's looking down on me. He thinks I'm a joke. He's acted weak all this time to play me as a fool. Was that attempt in Act 2? During a change in period when the subject teacher hadn't arrived yet, Katsuki marched towards Izuku's table, resolved to get answers. Head unmoving, Izuku's pupils momentarily shifted to see the person approaching him, glancing at Katsuki for a second before returning his gaze to his notebook, continuing to scribble in it. "Why, Deku," Katsuki called out. Izuku remained silent. Growing annoyed, Katsuki persisted. "I'm talking to you, Deku. Stop writing in that shitty notebook." Again, there was no response. "Answer me," he ordered, before reaching his hand to grab the notebook. He expected to easily take the notebook away, letting the nerd panic and plead as he held the notebook. Instead, without even looking at him, Izuku caught his wrist in a blur before it made contact with the notebook, startling Katsuki for the second time in the day. Izuku's grip was unnaturally strong. Katsuki tried to pull his hand away, but it didn't budge an inch. It was like his arm was trapped under layers of steel and concrete, tightly encased around his wrist. Shit, when was his grip this strong? Upon locking eyes with Izuku, who'd finally turned to face him, Katsuki froze. He didn't notice before, but there was something wrong with Izuku. On the surface, his facial appearance was nearly unchanged, with the exception of the cut-shaped scar on the right corner of his mouth, and his hair being very slightly longer. However, the way he carried himself changed. There wasn't a hint of the timid and meek Deku that Katsuki knew for more than 10 years. It was replaced by an air of confidence and boldness. What made Katsuki freeze, however, was something far more ominous. For as long as Katsuki knew Izuku, he could tell that there was always a passive aura of inoffensiveness and kindness that Izuku radiated, much to Katsuki's displeasure and annoyance. Izuku's personality made him more approachable and friendly to most people, but it was a sign of weakness, paving the way for Izuku to be a constant victim of quirk-related prejudice. It was so significant that Katsuki often questioned whether it was an act, lending him even more reasons to bully the nerd. Now, there wasn't a single sparkle or a trace of warmth behind that pair of iridian eyes. There was only unadulterated and calculating disdain that filled those dim eyes. Worst of all, Izuku's facial expression was far too relaxed to match the intensity that Katsuki felt from him. It was like seeing a predator that was teasing its still-alive prey, ever ready to sink its jaws into the neck of its food. Never was there a day that he imagined feeling uneasy when looking into those green eyes. As the unease spread, Katsuki was almost sure that Izuku was going to shatter his wrist. Instead, Izuku boredly rolled his eyes. "It wouldn't hurt to wait, you know," he stated. Snapping back to his senses, Katsuki opened his mouth to respond, before being interjected by Izuku. "I'd prefer if you didn't cause a commotion on the first day that I'm back. Meet me behind school at 3:30, and we'll settle whatever problem you have with me. Also, don't bring any of your lackeys along. It's better to keep things private," Izuku nonchalantly instructed, not wanting to deal with Katsuki's nonsense while in class. With that, Izuku released Katsuki's wrist, half expecting Katsuki to bother him again. But Katsuki, stupefied from what happened, returned to his seat and obliged to Izuku's request, more than inclined to not find out what would happen if he didn't. Just as Katsuki thought that Izuku wasn't going to show up, he was jump-scared by the voice of Izuku from behind. "What the foo? How'd you get behind me without making a sound?" "Kakin," Izuku greeted. He wanted to say Bakugu, but his mouth slipped. "Force of habit, I guess." "You're late. You said 3:30, not 3:40, Katsuki pointed out. "After all he's done, I can't believe I'm still using that shitty nickname from when we were kids." "Oh," Izuku quickly checked the time on his smartphone. "I was making sure that no one else was around," he explained, uncaring that he was late. Putting his phone back in his pocket, Izuku asked, "So what did you want?" Not wanting to beat around the bush. "How the hell did you recover so fast?" "You'll find out eventually, but long story short, my body is special," Izuku admitted. If Dr. Miyazaki kept to his word, there was a likelihood that his theory of rationalizing a heavenly restriction with quirk science would end up as a subject for some research paper, bringing it to the attention of the media. Bakugo would find out then. If he tried explaining about his heavenly restriction to Bakugo now, there wasn't a chance that Bakugo would buy his story. "What the hell are you talking about?" "Simply put, my body is special," Izuku repeated. "Bullshit. I visited you at the hospital the day after you jumped. You were broken from head to toe. Your mom told me everything. Lucky my ass. No way could someone quirkless like you could fully recover in 3 weeks. You have a strong quirk, don't you? Well, it was actually 2 weeks. I spent a week lazing around at home. Izuku corrected. That's not the fucking point. Like I said, my body's special. So that's how it is, huh? You hide a quirk from me? Try to kill yourself and act like nothing happened? Act like you're better than me? Katsuki accused. Izuku was beginning to get annoyed by Katsuki's stream of hybrid insult questions. Tell me, was your mom in on it too? Now Izuku was really pissed. But he wasn't willing to draw first blood. He couldn't be too quick to temper. If someone happened to be watching their little back and forth, he could claim self-defense if things escalated. What the hell are you going on about? Izuku retorted, raising his voice in irritation. Don't lie to me, damn it. Katsuki cursed, completely over his boiling point. If you want to hide it so badly, I'll make you show it. Katsuki furiously exclaimed, before throwing his right hand in a punch, prepared to launch an explosion at Izuku. He made the unfortunate mistake of acting before thinking. In his mind, he simply wanted to make Izuku stop pretending. A right hook. How predictable. Izuku effortlessly dodged the attack, allowing Katsuki to pass him, slightly followed by grabbing Katsuki's shoulder to turn him around before. Wham! Asterisk. Slamming his fist under the right side of Katsuki's ribs. At first, Katsuki was taken aback by the blow. Shit. He dodged and landed a punch before I could react. After a second that felt longer than it should have, pain flooded through Katsuki's body without a hint of resistance. Izuku let go of Katsuki's shoulder, resulting in Katsuki instantaneously crumpling to the ground, clutching the right side of his abdomen in excruciating pain, followed by his body curling on its own. He tried getting back on his feet, but his knees buckled under the effects of shock. It was absolute agony, unlike any kind of pain he'd suffered before. Adding on to the agony, it felt like the air was sucked out of his lungs. Asterisk gasp, asterisk ack. Nga, gasp grhhhh. He painfully groaned, briefly losing the ability of proper speech. To some, a liver shot was a cheap tactic, but there was no denying that it was an easy way to incapacitate someone without causing too much injury. Maybe a chokehold would have been kinder, but at least Izuku didn't have to bother with holding Katsuki in place. Izuku stared at the pathetic sight of his bully, sneaking in a tiny grin that was just visible enough for Katsuki to catch a glimpse of. Surprisingly effective move against amateurs. That should keep you still for a minute, Izuku informed. Approaching Katsuki's writhing form, Izuku calmly and near sadistically assured, "Don't worry. That won't leave any lasting damage. Not unless I shattered a rib or two with that punch, I think. Not that I know or care." The blow certainly wasn't hard enough to break one of Bakugu's ribs. At most it would have left a dark bruise, but he couldn't resist adding that last part just to see the panicked look on Bakugu's face. Katsuki continued gasping for air in disbelief, trying to process whatever the hell that just happened. Gasp, who are you? What the hell? Gas did you do to the real Deku? Katsuki questioned between pained gasps for air. For a second, Izuku was confused by Bakugu's odd question. Wait, what? Does he think I'm an imposter? What oh? Izuku realized, understanding what Bakugu meant. He couldn't exactly fault Bakugu for believing so, considering how much of his personality was warped by Toji's essence. Thinking that I'm a different person entirely is a stretch, but in a way, I'm no longer the same Izuku Midoriya that he knows. The heavenly restriction could be explained away, but trying to explain what really happened to him was an act of sheer folly, as no one sane would ever believe the events that transpired while he was comatose. Izuku crouched down, wanting to clear the air. Nothing that bizarre, but I understand why you'd think that. Because that's all you see and think of me, isn't it? A weak, scared, quirkless Deku. A monkey even. I always knew it, even while I let myself be degraded day after day by you. But I didn't want to admit or confront it, because I wanted to admire you. Admire you for what I didn't have. Talent, power, a quirk. He paused to let out a resentful laugh. That was until you gave me that idea to end all, to gamble my quirkless life in hopes of a better one. It didn't go like you'd expected, but I'd say it paid off for me. Katsuki could only listen as he tried to shift his focus from the pain in the right side of his abdomen, completely unsure what to make of Izuku's monologue. Sensing Bakugu's confusion, Izuku rose from his crouching position and sighed. Is it that hard to believe that I had a slight change in personality, especially after what happened? I guess I have you to thank for that, Izuku declared. Why you? NGH won't get away with doing that to me. Katsuki managed to let out through the blinding pain, finally managing to get on his feet, albeit on shaky knees. Izuku humorously smirked. You tell the heroes that I hurt you? Surely they'll believe how someone with a quirk as strong and great as yours was assaulted by a useless monkey like me. With a sudden burst of speed, he pulled Bakugu closer by the collar, further alarming the blonde. And besides, I think this is hardly anything compared to what you've done to me over the years. The words hit Katsuki like a tidal wave, drowning him in suffocating guilt. Deku's right. Releasing his grip, he sent the taller boy stumbling, despite the height difference. We're done. I don't care what you do next, but if you try anything with me again, I won't be as kind as today, Izuku warned before turning away, deciding that he'd wasted enough time. Wait, Katsuki pleaded. I'm sorry. Turning around, Izuku bitterly chuckled at Katsuki's attempt at an apology. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. How dare you say that to me? Is that all you have to say to me? After what you've done to me throughout all these years, I should gut you open alive like I did to Satoru Gojo for even daring to say that to my face. He's sorry. That doesn't change anything, not at this point. Fuck it. He wasn't in the mood to deal with the blonde. A little too late for that, don't you think? He replied cynically before finally walking away from the scene. He expected Bakugu to hurl more expletives at him, to demand him to come back or to even chase after him. But he only received silence. As soon as he'd left the school's compound, Izuku noticed something rather surprising, something that he never thought could happen after he merged with Toji's soul. He actually made me, he muttered to himself, nearly bursting into a mirthless laugh. His eyes were wet. He'd actually teared up at some point during his whole exchange with Bakugu. Fuck, he'd let his resentment of that Pomeranian overtake him for a moment. His pride. He wasn't supposed to care about such things anymore, much less get so worked up and emotional over it. He wasn't the useless failure, the Deku from before. He wasn't weak anymore. So why did he feel like this? Perhaps he was still more emotionally scarred than he'd led himself to believe. I don't care anymore. Useless, I don't care at all. Quirkless, I don't care. Monkey, I don't want to care. I don't. He didn't want to think too much about it. It was better that way. Almost as if the writersome higher being had heard his plight, his burner phone abruptly rang as he neared his home. He'd forgotten that he brought that to school. Opening the phone's cover, he could see that the caller was Kong. Raising the phone to his ear, he was assailed by the voice of Kong chewing him out. Fushiguro, you goddamn idiot, she scolded, trying to sound stern and professional, but obviously brimming with anger. What's with the sudden insult? He sarcastically asked. You were supposed to ambush Kitamura, not slaughter his whole gang, she reprimanded, almost yelling. Izuku defended himself. What? I only killed him. His gang's still alive. Well, mostly alive, he corrected. Yeah, I went a little overboard. That's not the damn point. Your little stunt ended up on the news. What? Search up what happened at Kaihoko recently, she suggested in a mildly unkind tone. Holding the burner phone between his shoulder and ear, Izuku pulled out his smartphone. He loaded a search engine and did as Kong suggested, before beholding the results. Traffickers found brutalized in an abandoned Kaihoko storehouse. Work of hero, vigilante, or even villain. Massacre in Kaihoko. 16 traffickers fatally injured and 1 dead. 17 quirk traffickers, 1 deceased, 5 injured, and 11 in critical condition discovered in Kaihoko storage facility. There were several more articles from the local news websites, but they all vaguely had more or less the same headline in different words. You do realize how much attention this has attracted, right? Kong pointed out. I didn't leave any traces. And it's not my fault that the client wasn't specific enough, he easily deflected. Still, look, Sai, you're a contract killer, not some bloodthirsty villain. I'd prefer if you didn't get heroes and the police on your tail. Makes business difficult more than it needs to be for both me and you, she explained. Izuku could imagine her rubbing her nose bridge on the other side of the line as she told him that, making him smile after what happened with Bakugo. You're acting like I'll get caught, he argued playfully. As he said that, he swore that he heard her say something about kids these days, under her breath. You're lucky the client doesn't care. If he did, my cut of the job would be gone. So, I assume you no longer want me working with you? Of course you're still working with me. It's not easy to find someone skilled enough to specifically kill one person while leaving the rest almost dead out of choice. I'd be more of an idiot than you if I decided to give up this fast on an investment. She further clarified, just try not to pull this stunt again for any future jobs, or at least keep things to a minimum. Understand. Obliging to Kong's request, he agreed. Fine, but no guarantees, he half-heartedly promised. For a second time, Izuku could hear another disappointed sigh. That's all. I'll update you if I have any jobs for you, Kong concluded. Before we end, I need your help again. What? Your katana broke? She joked. Get me in contact with someone who sells guns and a weaponsmith, preferably someone specializing in anything bladed, he requested. I'll pay for all their services, of course, he swiftly added. Izuku waited for a few seconds before hearing the flick of a lighter from Kong's side and receiving her response. Give me a few weeks, maybe a month. Gun runners aren't too hard to find, but the weaponsmith will take me a while. As long as you find one who knows his stuff, time isn't an issue for me. Preparing to end the call, Kong concluded once more, again, I'll update you on any jobs or get back to you once I'm done. Once the call was done, Izuku shoved the burner phone back into his pocket before taking a look at his smartphone again. Traffickers found brutalized in an abandoned Kaihoko storehouse. Work of hero, vigilante, or even villain. Work of hero, vigilante, or villain. More like the work of someone who's just doing a job. Entering his office, Nagai absent-mindedly tossed the 2 documents onto his desk before settling into his charcoal-colored office chair. As someone who held the rank of detective inspector, Nagai was privileged enough to have his own office, not needing to share a cramped space section by cubicles like the rest of the violent crimes unit's detectives. When he first moved in, his office was decorated with sterile, institutional furniture that lacked any personal touch. Some of his colleagues encouraged him to transform the place into something that was more of his own. In a debatably ironic way, he did. Over time, the sterile space was spoiled by a mix of paperwork, notes, and records scattered around in thick stacks that created an organized mess. Despite the mess, Nagai knew where to find what he needed, most of the time at least. The first of the documents was a sheet of paper listing 5 detectives, including himself, that were assigned to the Kaihoko case task force. Among the 4 other detectives, he'd only worked with one of them before, that being Detective Sergeant Suga. He's a detective sergeant already? He'll be my right hand then. Wonder when he got promoted, though. Outside of interrogating suspects or interviewing witnesses, Tsuruga was a man of extremely few words, but said man excelled when it came to the more physical and practical aspects of being a detective, in part to his large physique and quiet demeanor that made him both intimidating and effective in most scenarios. He was the type of detective that everyone wanted when things got violent, possessing a quirk that was well suited for physical altercations. Despite his size, he moved with surprising agility too. While his investigative skills were second to his physical abilities, Tsuruga made up for it with a tireless work ethic. Once the man set his mind to something, he was scarily persistent. Nagai appreciated that about him. Nagai recognized the names of the remaining 3 detectives, but he wasn't personally acquainted with them. He'd heard accounts of their exploits from other colleagues. Still, they were almost complete strangers to him. Reaching for the second document, Nagai's hands opened the paper dossier containing the compiled scene report. He filtered key information from each page of the report, his obsidian eyes scanning sentence after sentence. The officers and forensics team had done an acceptable job compiling everything they could find within the storage facility into roughly a dozen pages worth of information, much to Nagai's convenience. Reading or writing reports were seen by some colleagues as one of the most boring parts of working in force. Nagai understood their point of view, but personally he didn't hold any strong opinions towards the task. It was nothing to about, as it was a basic step that was required to move things along. There was one thing, however, that currently cast a light shade of dissatisfaction onto him, that being the recent decision made for his case. Given the number of casualties involved in such a case, it was inevitable that the incident would become a headline for the local news networks. In Nagai's humble but apathetic, so his colleagues claimed, opinion, it was preferable to keep the entire incident hidden from the public or media, or at the very least have it kept under an embargo. Letting news of the incident spread would tell whatever person responsible that their deed was under the police's radar, acting as a sign for said person to operate less brazenly or even go into hiding. Being less brazen potentially meant less evidence, and less evidence meant a tougher case to solve. A tougher case also meant more time he'd need to solve it. Just great. Despite Nagai's reasoning, the higher-ups and some HPSC representatives insisted on releasing the news. The public had to be aware for safety purposes, they said, lest this unknown new villain cause another incident in a more public area. He wasn't entirely against the decision, but the problem was that no one even knew who or what they needed to watch out for, authorities included. Based on the reports, there wasn't much to go off from the initial on-scene investigation. Almost everything regarding the incident still remained shadowed by unknowns. Just as he dreaded, even the forensics team hit a wall. Any blood, fingerprints, or hair they found and tested all belonged to the traffickers. The team did discover things that the police officers weren't able to, but there was nothing crucial enough to make a breakthrough in the case. Shit, they found nothing foreign. No residuals that could have come from the perpetrator. As for Kitamura himself, a background check revealed that he was the heir to what was once one of the richest construction companies in Shinjuku. By the time Kitamura was born, however, the company had crumbled from years of scandals and mismanagement, leaving Kitamura to grow up with virtually nothing but rags. As an adult, he mostly wandered around Shinjuku working all kinds of odd jobs. Consequently, he barely had any connections on record. It made tracing his prior activity next to impossible. Kitamura's phone wasn't much help either. Going through the phone, it was revealed from text messages discussing their trafficking operation that Kitamura was the ringleader, and that his men were composed of local thugs he'd recently hired, rather than the entire group originating from Shinjuku. Unfortunately, the phone was very new, containing very little data, having likely been bought just a week prior. Other than the context from the messages, the phone didn't contain any significant information, such as Kitamura's other associates, enemies, the specifics about his plans, or anything of the like to build off on. Adding insult to injury, the number that Nagai found also led to a dead end. The phone was inactive, its last known active location being some train station in Jaka City. Local police were sent to investigate, but nothing turned up. Then there was the matter of the perpetrator's motivation. It would have been easy enough to point fingers had everyone in that facility died. There were a few villains with cutting or slashing base quirks and the mindset to cause the carnage at the storage facility. The fact that only one person died, however, created more issues than Nagai would have liked. None of Nagai's suspects were the type to spare anyone. Kitamura's death was unlikely to be a coincidence, considering that the lighter cuts on the rest of the traffickers in contrast to the death blows received by Kitamura indicated a certain level of restraint. It did lend some credence to his assassin hypothesis, even if there wasn't much to support it in the first place. What was the purpose behind only killing Kitamura, though? Could we expect to see such an incident again, and how soon? If he wanted to solve the case fast, he needed answers to those questions. Killing one person, but to brutally maim the rest? Why? The entire case didn't fit into the typical outline for gang hits. Call it intuition or a gut feeling. But Nagai somehow knew that the perpetrator possessed an oddly twisted moral compass. Mercy? He would never admit it to anyone, but he'd probably do something similar to the traffickers if he had the chance. Nothing as brutal as the actual thing, of course. As villainous as that sounded, he was still a morally sound person that believed in doing things the right way. It was just that some people deserved more than what the law was allowed to deliver. Nagai leaned back in his chair, letting the details from the report settle into his head. He rubbed his temples as frustration brewed within him. Interrogation of those traffickers better provide some answers. Even better, a face for me to find. Mulling over the reports for a few more minutes, Nagai came up with several explanations that were shakily feasible. To send a message. What kind of message? For what? From who and to who? A personal grudge. No doubt someone like him would be hated by many. If so, why weren't the others killed along with him? A vigilante. Could be that some vigilante just stumbled into their base and got into a fight with them. Then again, if this vigilante had no issue killing one person, why not kill the rest? As he pondered, there were a few soft knocks to the door of his office before it was gently swung open. Detective Nagai, a younger, more modest voice called out, followed by the sound of the door closing and light footsteps on the linoleum floor. Eyes still fixated on the report, Nagai acknowledged the visitor in his office. Yes, he replied in a dry tone. The autopsy is done. You can go talk to the pathologist now, the visitor informed. Raising his head, his eyes made contact with the visitor,